inextricably tying that with public policy. So it's such a movement wherein we can all focus on some of the conceptual, methodological, and ethical issues pertaining to these areas. So that's where this conference becomes so very important, and we are glad that Professor Sudarshan thought about this and he's organizing this, which is again an annual event, and we are so grateful to colleagues at the School of Government and Public Policy for their contributions to these areas. Over the years, they have been doing some exceptionally good work, and the School of Government and Public Policy is one of the early schools on public policy that was established in India. And we are also greatly benefited by friends and well-wishers who have been collaborating with us over the years, which includes people like Professor Ratin Roy, who just joined us. So it's such a pleasure to have all of us come together for this important and auspicious occasion. And I'm also grateful to colleagues from other schools, which includes deans of all schools. And here we have today Professor Stephen Marks, Dean of School of Public Health and Human Development. And of course, we also have with us Professor Naresh Singh, the Executive Dean of the school. And we are thankful to all the students who work tirelessly in order to ensure that this conference becomes a reality. And we also have students from overseas sitting here and taking part in the proceedings. So we cannot ask for more with colleagues joining us from around the world and within the country online. It's going to be an enriching and an engaging experience over the next course of 2 days, bringing together strands of different areas affecting the larger policy initiatives and policy goals and policy outcomes of the country. And together, I'm sure that we can contribute to the common good of the society and mankind. On this particular note, I once again welcome each one of you, and I also wish to place on record my sincere appreciation to colleagues from the administration for their support in making this conference a reality. Thank you so much, and welcome you all once again.
Thank you, Professor Patnaik. Now, I'd like to call upon Professor Sudarshan, Dean of Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, for the welcome address.
Thank you. Welcome to all of you. We are. All right. So this is the annual conference of the School of Government and Public Policy. We wanted to make this a kind of a annual feature, but we are a young institution, and there are well-established annual conferences in Delhi, for instance, in the Indian Statistical Institute, the Delhi School of Economics, the IIT. I mean, these are all exemplars of meetings that people want to come to. We are not quite there yet, but we're very grateful to have the kind of people we have today at this conference, because that's exactly the kind of thing that's needed for this annual conference to gain a reputation. So we have to be not just grateful, but doubly grateful, more than grateful, that we've got a very excellent lineup of speakers, beginning with the first keynote address for the conference from Dr. Beena Agarwal. This is the title of the conference is just that we've got economics in the school and we've got public policy. But it's very difficult really to say quite how the two might connect. Economists do play a significant part in the shaping of public policy. Some people might think they play too much of a part in the shaping of public policy, and other disciplines might get overlooked. And public policy inherently is interdisciplinary. You need perspectives from almost all of the social sciences, because it has to do with people, and their behavior, and how to get people to behave in the way that's in their best interests, not just in the short run, but also in the long run. And therefore, it's difficult to kind of, just place an emphasis only on economics when you're dealing with public policy. But nonetheless, economics is a important discipline, and it so happens that we've been assigned to have a master's program and a bachelor's program in economics in the school, but it's a very applied kind of curriculum, because economics in a public policy school has to be more practitioner oriented, and therefore we think that over time we'd be able to get more clear perspectives on the kinds of economics that are needed. And in that respect, I think the participants that we have in this conference are exemplars of that connection between their discipline, which is economics, could be, but very practical and policy oriented. And so I don't want to take up too much time. I just wanted to say that we are very grateful. So for the first panel, it just so happens we've just had the elections. I think everyone was surprised at the results, particularly when there were other predictions about what the outcome might be. And so on the one hand, there's something in these elections for everyone. And I think it's a positive turn. But so we've got an excellent panel that's going to discuss what we might have to do in the next 5 years from where we are now, just after the election. So that's the first panel, and we'll shortly invite the panelists to take their places on the dais here. But before that, I want to say I'm particularly grateful to Beena. Professor Beena Agarwal is one of those persons whose work has made a big difference, not just to, in public policy, but in governments, in civil society, and even in international organizations. There's some of the SDG goals and their associated targets wouldn't be there, but for the contribution that Beena has made with an absolutely outstanding book called The Fields of One's Own. So the entire issue of women's participation in economic life, women's rights, equality for women, women's rights as human rights, all of these contributions that Beena has made as a scholar are undoubtedly first rate and widely acknowledged. I mean, so Beena has been in practically every university that you would regard as top ranking in the world. She's got several honorary doctorates as a result of that recognition. And she served in the Indian Institute of Economic Growth as its director, and is presently in the University of Manchester. It just so happens that this university has just signed a MOU with the University of Manchester, and it's barely 2 weeks ago. And so to have Beena connect and give sort of a fillip to this partnership with the University of Manchester is another plus. Beena's work has been praised by many people, but I would single out the praise that Eleanor Ostrom gave to her work, because Eleanor Ostrom got the Nobel Prize for, she's not an economist, technically a political scientist, but she got the Nobel Prize for her extraordinary work on common property resources and alternatives to market and state. And that's very sincere and genuine praise that comes from Eleanor Ostrom, and that puts Beena in the same league, in my opinion. And therefore, we are very grateful, Beena, that you've joined us. So you have, we had allotted a whole hour, and I think we will take that whole hour because we want to benefit by your insights this morning. So I'd like to invite you to give the keynote to this talk. And I have to say, many people are connected online. So even though we selected a large room, one of the reasons we did that is because of the technology. We've got the screen here and it connects easily to others. Smaller rooms, it's more seminar-like, but it's more difficult to project and get clarity on the Zoom. This venue provides that. So out of consideration to those who are connecting online, we thought even if we are a little sparse in a very large room, it's better to be here than in another room. So that's just a small excuse for, it's nice to have a packed room, but imagine there are people connecting to you and listening to you. And moreover, it's recorded. So those who miss the proceedings live will be able to access it. And our students, when they come back, we'll certainly have them listen to the proceedings and hopefully have some invigorating classroom discussions. So there's a lot of positive outcomes from having a meeting of this kind, apart from personally for me, getting together with good friends and, spending a couple of days with them. Thank you. Bina, over to you.
Yes, this is not my PPT. I'm the. Yes. Yes. Maximize. Wonderful. Thank you. I don't normally use plastic, but there you are. I know, but it's way off. Good. Thank you. So, it's always better to have 5 interested students than 500 who fall asleep. So the issue of numbers, you're absolutely right. And it's Professor Patnaik, thank you, and Dean Professor Sudarshan, thank you for inviting me to give this keynote. It's a real honor. Would you mind if I just did whatever I wanted to do? Sorry. Skipping. Okay, and distinguished colleagues, friends, thank you for being here. And also I thank Dr. Shivangi Chandal for all the background logistical work that she did to bring us here, and all the students who've been there, probably didn't get much sleep last night. This is a beautiful university, very green. I came for the first time yesterday, although I remember that the Vice Chancellor and Sudarshan, we'd met when it was just being formed informally in Delhi, and plans were being made. And look what's come of it is something amazing. So my lecture will be on rethinking agriculture. Now, in standard economic theory, as countries develop, the role of agriculture is expected to diminish, both as a source of employment and in its contribution to GDP. But it is supposed to continue providing surplus food, raw materials, and labor to a growing urban industrial capitalist sector. This is what we might expect if we follow the model of industrialized economies. Agriculture declines, manufacturing and services grow, and workers shift from rural to urban areas. Now, the most important proponent of this type of model was, of course, Arthur Lewis, the first Black Nobel laureate in economics, and after whom the building in which I sit at the University of Manchester is named. In practice, however, most developing countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America have yet to make the expected shift. And large proportions of their populations remain embedded in farming. In India, about 48% of all workers, 60% of rural workers remain in agriculture. And 50% of farmers' children remain farmers. Now, most scholars and policymakers see this as a failure of development, and they see agriculture and smallholder farming as a drag on growth. But need it be so? Can agriculture and smallholder farming become an engine to growth? So today I will argue that it can, if we rethink the way we farm. Now, agriculture today in India presents a paradox, because on the one hand, it is the only sector in India's economy which had a positive growth rate through the pandemic, while other sectors, in fact, had a negative growth rate. And even today, it's holding up. Last year, it grew at 4%. At the same time, agriculture contributes only 15 to 60% of GDP. Moreover, agricultural growth has come at a very high environmental cost, making it unsustainable. The yields of our major crops, rice and wheat, are much below their potential, not just of, say, a country like China, but even a country like Bangladesh. And climate change, we know, is here to stay. The temperatures outside are ample proof of that. Now, some 86% of our farmers, some 86% are small and marginal. And most of them are deeply unhappy and want to leave farming. So we need to ask, isn't it time that we rethought the way we farm? Now, smallholders who form the bedrock of our farming system face many challenges. And I've divided these challenges into three categories. There are ecological challenges where we see depleting water sources, degrading soils, and declining biodiversity. And all this under the deep shadow of climate change. Technologically, we are far behind in water conserving technology and climate resilient crops. And institutionally, we still depend on small family farms based on the exploitation of family labor. They have limited access to land, to inputs, to extension, to credit, to markets. Our extension services are barely functional. Also, we have not taken adequate advantage of agriculture's allied sectors, livestock, fisheries, and forests. Nor have we built enough synergy with the wider rural economy. So how do we change this? So I'd like to expand on 4 of these challenges and then discuss some potential solutions. First of all, we need to consider water, which is key to higher production and yields. Even after over 70 years of planning, only 49% of our cropped area is irrigated, and much more is irrigable. Did you know that India uses 90% of its groundwater for irrigation, and we have been grossly over-extracting? So as you can see in this diagram, the red part is the alarm zone in particular. Now, Punjab, for instance, we know is our breadbasket to the neighboring state. Water tables have been falling at 2.6 feet per year since 2000. By recent World Bank estimates, 65% of India's blocks will be over-extracting groundwater by 2030. So I don't know if you remember any pictures of Persian wheels, which could draw water in Punjab because it was so much on the surface. And today, you have to go deep underground with deep immersion pumps. Now, much of this depletion is in fact due to government policy, especially free electricity and zero penalty. So in Punjab, for instance, between 1997 and 2002, it led to a 40% decline in canal irrigation. Remember the dams and the canals that it was used to be the canal colony and state of the country. There's a 40% decline in canal irrigation and a rise in groundwater use. No state has metered groundwater except West Bengal. Now, groundwater, as we know, is a common pool resource, but rich farmers treat it like a private resource. So they use immersion pumps to overdraw. Surface water is also mismanaged. What we need is regulation and not subsidies. So for instance, Sudarshan had a farm and there was an aquifer, and that aquifer ran under the farms of, let's say, Punam and Mathura and Shiv and so on. But Sudarshan, if he had a deep immersion done, he could draw out all the groundwater, leaving the other dry. Now, the second is, of course, consider soil degradation. 37% of geo area is degraded from various causes. An important one, in fact, is water mismanagement, which is poorly managed canal sites, which can lead to waterlogging and soil salinity. Monoculture and excessive use of chemicals also, of course, contribute to declining soils. And in the 70s, again, you know, it's a long time ago, Punjab used to intercrop wheat with pulses, which are nitrogen fixing. This vanished with the Green Revolution. And then, of course, third, we have to consider climate change. And I use this table because it's particularly useful to see the differences with and without, that these are IFPRI estimates, and the sharpest fall in crop yields of main food crops are predicted or were predicted to be South Asia. That still holds true, and many other studies point in the same direction. Most of all, we are a small farmer country. As I said, 86% of our farmers cultivate 2 hectares or less. Often they are not in a single plot, they are in fragments, and they occupy almost 47% of operated area. Most are too small to effectively use even machinery. So if you've got a small sliver of land, you have a piece of machinery, sometimes you can't even turn it around. 75 to 80% depend on informal credit. And overall, our farm incomes are low and erratic. Now, we know that for a long time, both our larger farmers and the government have been focusing on better prices and market reform. But smallholders can only gain if they first produce enough surplus to sell. If you don't have surplus to sell, then you're not going to gain by higher prices. At present, 70% of farmers produce less than 4 to 5% of marketed surplus in wheat and rice, even in surplus states. And barely 6 to 12% sell in mandis. Now, these figures could be on, you could quibble on the margins, but broadly true. So the question is, how much are they going to gain by simply minimum support prices? In addition, there are serious gender inequalities in land ownership. Now, there's a recent paper of mine which shows that women constitute only 14% of landowners in rural landowning households across 9 states, owning only 11% of the land. And most of these are elderly widows. Now, you'd be surprised by this because in 2005, India amended the Hindu Succession Act to make it gender equal in agricultural land and in terms of co-pastoral property. But these are 2014 figures, 9 years later. Why does this inequality matter? Well, it matters for many, many reasons, but also it matters for today's discussion because an increasing proportion of farmers are de facto female. So it's not surprising, therefore, that many farmers would really prefer another job. So I did a paper with a colleague at IIT Delhi, and we used the NSSO SAS survey data. And what the survey did was it asked 50,000 farmers across the country, do you like farming? 40% said they did not. This included both poor farmers with low output and better off farmers with other aspirations. Women more than men, young more than old, disliked farming and wanted other jobs. Now, clearly, these problems can't be solved by tinkering with prices and mandis. High prices and market reforms can benefit smallholders, but only if we first address their production constraints, ecological, technological, and institutional. So here's a key question. Can we farm differently, sustainably, and equitably? I believe we can if we rethink the way we farm and seek transformative change. So I will illustrate this. The first shift needs to be in irrigation and water conservation. Now, with irrigation expansion upwards from the current mere 49% of cropped area, we can greatly increase yields, cropping intensity, and grow more high-value crops. But we can't do this via groundwater mining or just by building large dams. We need a much more complex combination of groundwater regulation, rainwater harvesting, and micro-irrigation. So here are some figures, India has over 52,000 dams. The question is this the way to go? So there's, of course, the famous Bhakra Nangal Dam, which Nehru called the Temple of Resurgent India. And there's the much more recent, since then, the Tehri Dam, and so on. But these have very high environmental costs and human costs. And we have done it to the neglect of other irrigation works, and especially rainwater harvesting. Now, rainwater catchments, in fact, provide surface irrigation and recharge water. Now, India has some of you will know, and otherwise it's worth doing a whole ecotourism trip to look at the step wells across India. India has a very ancient history of rainwater harvesting with stunning architectural designs of step wells, as you can see. And some of these are hundreds of years old, and some of them have been revived. But there are also new systems that are being created of rainwater harvesting. So if you see this, there are two ways. One is these jodas, which recharge wells, and here at the bottom is a recharged well, which through community cooperation was built, and then the water shared. So you'll say, well, what difference does this make? So here are some figures of an increase in output in Gujarat state. Between 1999 and 2009, Gujarat's agriculture grew at almost 9.6% per annum, 9.6%, attributed to rainwater harvesting and BT cotton. Over some 10 to 15 years, Gujarat built 0.5 million microstructures, check dams, bunds, and so on. And I might mention that surface irrigation needs communities to cooperate because there are like a commons. How do you share water? You have to share who gets the water and when. But we do have a successful history of doing so. So you can see that is a board going back to the colonial period, or the Varabandi system in the Punjab, where it was said which farmer would take how much water. But of course, you can have regulation, but the farmers then had to follow that. I'm merely saying that to the skeptics, especially the economists who say people can't cooperate. And I'll have a lot more to say on that. So there are different rainwater harvesting systems, if you like. There's there's the tanks, there's the recent recharge, and there is the old system of canal water sharing. But we also need to use the water more efficiently, and this can range from drip irrigation to growing less water guzzling crops. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about should Punjab be growing, rice, for instance, and what are they suited? The crops we grow, are they driven by markets, or are they driven by the local ecology? Now, in 2014, a government study for 13 states found that micro-irrigation, especially drip, significantly reduced water and fertilizer use while raising wheat yields by 25% and vegetable yields by 52%. But only 6 to 7% of India's crop area is under micro-irrigation. Now, Narega, for instance, could be used to build check dams and canals with some hydrological technical inputs. The second shift is, of course, away from cereal monoculture to crop diversity and agroecological farming. Now, broadly, this means basically that you revive local ecology through diverse natural practices and mixed cropping. Now, this would have both ecological and economic benefits. It would revive the soils, it would reduce costs, it would employ more labor, and it would increase incomes and profits. And moreover, it would move to more diverse produce, poultry, fruits, vegetables, which is the direction in which our dietary habits and patterns have been changing. So a recent survey of 57 countries covering 286 projects with diverse experiments in sustainable farming found a mean yield increase of 79%. Now, I'm not talking about zero budget farming, which we know on which there is a debate, and there could be mixed results, but it does mean much more low chemical and much more mixed cropping farming. The third, we need research for heat-resistant crops to deal with climate change. And here there's enormous scope, not just within India, but also across Asia, where different ecologies are shared. And a related need is efficient extension. So there was a recent article in Science which found that providing agricultural information via cell phones increased yields by 4%, and the odds of adopting recommended inputs by 22% across several countries, including India. Of course, it will mean ensuring that small farmers, and especially women farmers, have access to smartphones. And fourth, perhaps the most difficult, is the issue of smallholder farmers and the disadvantages they face. And here we need institutional change. It's very easy to talk about market changes and technological changes, but institutional change is really a key issue. Now, in a widely cited paper by two American economists who some of you might know, Andrew Foster and Mark Rosenweig, they wrote a paper asking, are Indian farms too small? And they found that an increase in farm size up to 8 hectares, but especially up to 2 hectares, increased per hectare profits. Our farms, as I said, are too small to even use machines effectively to tap scale economies or provide farmers with bargaining power in markets. So how do you increase farm size? An important way is for smallholders to cooperate in production. Now, so I'm asking here, can small farmers, small owners become larger producers? Now, the word cooperative is often used very casually, and we need to be much more precise. So I've elaborated this in several papers. I'm doing a book on this as well, that cooperation in farming can be at many levels. And it is important to concentrate on this because we think of, oh, there are many cooperatives, there's so much cooperation. What do we mean? It can actually range from what I call single purpose to multi-purpose to fully integrated cooperation. Now, single purpose, you'll be familiar with. Marketing cooperatives are the most common in India and globally. For instance, in the dairy industry. So Amul is a case in point. But in between, we find medium purpose cooperation, such as buying machines together, buying crop planning. And this is very important, crop planning across ecological zones. But fully integrated cooperation involves collective production, land pooling, and cooperation on a daily basis. And this is what I term group farming. So here are some pictures for you. So this is an example of partial Amul, 3.6 million, mostly women, but the numbers would increase all the time. There's medium purpose where one of the NGOs, Pradhan, but many others have also been trying ecological planning across zones. And then there's group farming, about which I will have more to say. There's Kerala, but there are also other states. Now, conceptually, smallholder cooperation for group farming could help enlarge farm size by the smallholders pooling owned and leased in land and cultivating jointly. Now, potentially, this could have many advantages. It would increase economic viability, reap economies of scale. Also, the groups could save on hired labor. It could bring in a larger pool of funds and inputs. It could tap into greater diversity of skills than any one person or one family would have. And it would help experiment with risk-prone higher value crops with larger payoffs. Groups can also better deliver on contracts, and they have higher bargaining power with governments and in markets. They're also better positioned to take steps to deal with climate change. And most importantly, for women farmers, groups can help overcome conservative social norms and give them greater mobility and autonomy in farm management. If a single woman wants to go to the marketplace, she'll hesitate to do so. But if she has 4 of them and they go jointly, they're able to perfectly do that. So you'll say all that is fine in theory. What about practice? But before I give you ground examples, let me say that we have to tackle skepticism. So when I mention group farming, over the years, people immediately say, oh, it won't work. We tried group farming in the 1960s and it failed. But as with all failures, we need to then ask, well, why did it fail? We failed because we paid very little attention to institutional design. Cooperation in the 60s was promoted top-down. It was structurally unequal. We misguidedly pushed large and small farmers into one cooperative without recognizing conflicting interests and mistrust. And if you just even look at the pages of the first 3 plans, you'll see that there was a lot of push in that direction. And also there was no mechanism for participative decision-making, for conflict resolution, and equal sharing of costs and benefits. In other words, we violated basic principles of successful cooperation, either by commission or omission. And these are also some of the principles that Elinor Ostrom emphasized, although I want to say that the principles that work for common pool resources don't necessarily work in the same way for private property resources, and that's part of my project. Now, these principles very broadly need to be that we need to have, the groups have to be voluntary. It's not like the socialist experience of collectivization. The group should be small. They should be economically homogeneous. And what I've learned in my research is that they should be socially heterogeneous and cemented by trust. I'll come back to this point. We need participative decision-making, checks on free riding, so that we ensure that everybody turns up for work, and fair and transparent sharing of production costs and returns. So the good news is that today there are many examples of group farming that follow these principles, both in India and in Europe. In India, in the early 2000s, a highly successful model of group farming emerged in South India. And I'll give you the best of these examples, which was in Kerala. In the early 2000s, Kerala, as part of its anti-poverty program mission, Kudumshri, promoted all women group enterprises. Not only group farming, but particularly group farming. And it modified the SHG model to constitute village-level neighborhood groups for savings and credit. Members of these groups could then go on to have joint enterprises such as group farming. Now, under group farming, 4 to 6 women come together to jointly cultivate leased-in land, pooling labor and resources, sharing costs and returns. They do get some support, a startup grant from the government, technical training, and access to subsidized credit via NABARD, which is available to all states in the country. Now, state support somewhat levels the playing field for women's groups versus mainly male-managed individual farms, but not fully, because these groups are largely leasing in land, whereas and women also face structural difficulties in markets. How many such farms are there in Kerala alone? More than 770,000 in every district, involving more than 3 lakh women. So I, as an economist, also then wanted to see, well, how do these group farms, all women group farms, perform in relation to individually managed family farms? Most of them are being male managed. So I did this study very laboriously in 2 districts of Kerala, and collected on a sample of 250 farms, including group and individual farms. And I collected weekly data for all inputs and outputs for an entire year, as well as qualitative data via focus group discussions. Now you'll ask, why weekly data? Most people do it seasonally, and so on. And the reason is because nobody keeps accounts. So if you want to get really good data on labor use, you have to do it weekly, because nobody will remember, just as you won't be able to say how much toothpaste you had in a week. You won't be able to remember how much labor you used, unless it's fairly close to memory. Now, these group members are economically homogeneous and poor, but they're socially heterogeneous across caste and religion. And this goes against standard collective action theory, which says that homogeneity promotes cooperation. What social heterogeneity does is that these women then carry much more social capital. And this is particularly useful if they are negotiating in land markets. So despite all of this, the groups lease in land, as I said, whereas the individual family farms mostly own the land. Despite all of this, the all-women group farms outperformed the individual family farms. Now, when you looked at it cross-sectionally without controls, I found that the annual value of output per hectare of group farms is 1.8 times that of small individual farms. The average net return of a group farm was 5 times that of individual farms after deducting all paid out costs. And the net returns per hectare of groups was 1.6 times individual farms. Then after controlling, and I won't give you all the regression results and so on, they are in my papers. After controlling for inputs and other factors, the shift from an individual to group farming was linked to a 30% increase in the annual value of output per hectare. In addition, there were indirect benefits. There's capability expansion for the women. They learned to be managers. They acquired new technical skills. They became familiar with a wide range of institutions. They learned to negotiate in multiple markets, land markets, input markets, output markets. They also developed strong identities as farmers rather than being seen as farm wives. So as one woman said, group farming has enriched my farming experience. I realized I had good leadership qualities and could also manage the technical aspects of farming. Many others reported this. And, it was very interesting when you were doing field work. The women said earlier, we used to ask for technical inputs, and now the male farmers would ask, "Ab kya sikha aapne?" And we'd like to learn from it. So it's a big, big reversal. And then they found themselves more empowered in family and community, and many have stood for local panchayat elections, and they have won. And I'll give you an amusing example of one example that a woman gave of feeling empowered. She said, after I joined the group farm and these returns came, my husband went with me to the cinema to watch a film. So it's, you might think it's trivial, but for her, it was an idea of equality. Now, you'll say, well, are group farms only relevant for Kerala? Kerala is different. And only for women? So the answer is no. We also have examples of group farming in Telangana, and new groups have emerged in Bihar, in North Bengal, and Gujarat. These Eastern India, Western India, partly influenced by my work and results. And we found that the groups in Bihar and North Bengal, and remember, this is a very different cultural and both ecological and social context. Here, it includes not just all women groups, but all male groups and mixed gender groups, and young and old. And some pool their own land, others lease in land. All the groups showed an increase in yields compared to farming individually, and in some cases, they saw a doubling of wheat yields. And what's interesting is that it was the combination of irrigation and group formation. So the International Water Management Institute wanted to have an intervention for irrigation, but they found that the farms were too scattered and small to do that. So they suggested that the farmers come together and consolidate. And as a result, they were able to do the irrigation intervention. Why I'm saying this is that sometimes we think of technology, it's the technology which is driving it, but here it was a close combination that without the institutional change, the technological change would not have been possible. And in Bihar, the groups who were leasing in land were also able to negotiate lower rents and challenge feudal relations, refusing to do non-paid work. Most noticeably, some of the youths are doing vegetable farming, and they were earlier migrating to cities, and now they say that they're closer to home and they're also enjoying it. Finally, the groups did better than individual farms in crisis management, and COVID is a good example. In Kerala, of the 31,000 groups cultivating in March 2020, late 2020 under lockdown, 87% survived economically, especially the vegetable farmers, while individual male vegetable farmers lost out. And lack of harvest labor, market access, and so on. Similarly, in Bihar and Gujarat, the farmers groups, the group farms reported being much more food secure under COVID lockdown than individual farmers. And then here's a possibility of scaling up, which is you can have federated structures. So you can have the joint group farming at several of them in a single village, but you can then federate it. And here is where I think the example of farmers producers organization can work, because FPOs, if you hear it, they're not producing together, they're marketing together. But in fact, if you solve the production constraint, then you'd be able to come together for better marketing and prices. Okay, so so far we've talked about changing the way we do crop production. Now, this is the heart of agriculture, but it's not the whole of it. So let us not forget that agriculture also has allied sectors, livestock, fisheries, and forests, which account for 40% of the gross value added from agriculture. Now, livestock is poor-centric, women-centric, and you have cooperative marketing possibilities like Amul. And fisheries is over half of the fish consumed globally comes from aquaculture, which is inland fisheries. And India has the world's second largest producer of aquaculture fish. Fisheries employ 13.5 million, 32% are women. In 2022-23, our fisheries grew at 10%. So there's a huge potential here for growth, especially by groups. Similarly, we tend to forget that there are forests, and they provide small farmers with green manure, fodder, soil, water, firewood, uncultivated food. And there's a institution called the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, TEEB, according to which forests and commons provide 47% of our GDP of the poor. But of course, we know we need to protect our forests, revive forests. And here, community forestry, launched by India in 1990, has borne fruit. Our forest cover has increased to 21% of our geo area. Our target is 33%. And in my book, Gender and Green Governance, I showed that these improvements are much greater if communities include poor women in governance, since they have the most stake in forests and firewood and fodder. Moreover, forest protection, we know, if you include plantation, biodiversity, restoration can create thousands of jobs. So to transform agriculture ecologically, technologically, and institutionally, we should treat crops, livestock, fish, and forests as an integrated whole. And of course, for this transformation, we need the cooperation of rural communities. And then my final point is that linking agriculture to and locating it within the rural non-farm sector. Now, 61% of the income, as we know, of rural households comes from the non-farm sector. And here, of course, as many have been saying, including people in this room, that we need more farm and non-farm linkages. Now, this sector is very heterogeneous. What do we mean by rural non-farm? It can include food, garments, construction, transport, and so on. Santosh Malhotra, I'm sure, has a lot more to say on this. But here again, we have a vast untapped potential. Agro-processing, I was astonished to see this figure that rural families purchase 80% of their food they consume, largely through SMEs. India has 6 million SHGs. Many are running group enterprises. More could do so. There's the issue of machine tools. You remember Ludhiana's story and how it linked to agro-processing. And what's happened? Why are we not doing more of that? There's also farm tourism and ecotourism. In all over Europe, that farms bring in school children, they bring in tourists, and we just haven't exploited it in terms of raising certainly farm incomes. So I just want to use this one slide to say what we shouldn't think of as alternatives. So all of you will agree that green energy is a good thing, right? Solar is a good thing. But then the question is, how are we producing this solar? So we've created some 50 solar parks have been approved by the government. Do you know that 74% will be on farmland and natural ecosystems? So if you've heard the word land grabs, what's happening is green grabs. What we need is decentralized solar energy production. So this issue of green growth and so on, we have to then really be critical of the underside of it. What does it actually mean? And does it mean that it leads to hugely disadvantage poorer farmers, and also reduce biodiversity. To conclude, instead of thinking of agriculture as a drag on growth, we can make it an engine of growth by making it technically sophisticated, environmentally sustainable, and institutionally innovative. And it would also, this would also create energy with the rural non-farm sector. And most importantly, I believe it could be one of the factors to make agriculture as a attractive livelihood option for rural youth. So instead of staying on in agriculture and being extremely unhappy, you could be very different in terms of seeing this as an enterprise. So here we have an opportunity, not just in the new government, but a new era, to take another form of agrarian change, a form which is more equitable and inclusive, which is ecologically sustainable, is institutionally innovative, and it's attractive to women and youth. But we do need cooperation. We do need both at the individual level and at the community level, and we need more conservation. And among other things, it'll lead to happier farmers. Thank you.
Beena, you didn't mention what's been of concern to farmers here. For 13 months, the road to this, the GT road was blocked. We knew the consequences of it. And that had to do with an anxiety about corporate farming. Now, if a corporation took over, they would get economies of scale, they'd get some of these advantages, and they promise farmers a higher income. And so I'd like you to contrast a little bit about this notion of a corporate farming that seems to be attractive to some sectors in our government and the group farming that you are advocating.
Okay, so corporate farming is very different. I mean, if you think of, say, before that, think of contract farming. Now, we have quite a lot of contract farming, but typically contract, we have it in sugarcane, we have in other crops. So contract farming is that at the end of the value chain, you buy the raw materials and you talk to farmers and you say you deliver so much. So they don't necessarily take care of the production constraints of farmers. They're basically interested in delivery. Now, corporate farming can mean many things, but it's certainly not a strategy for inclusiveness. And I don't hear, if you talk about corporate farming and you look at major forms of corporate farming, let's say in the West, let's say North America, even parts of Europe, where farms are expanding, land is being taken away, they want full control of it. So I think there's a difference between contract farming, where the farmers are still in place and then you're buying their produce, versus corporate farming, which is, it's large scale, but you're doing all the production in it, not the small farmers. So then you have to ask, well, where will the small farmers go? Because, Paul Collier, for instance, has been talking about this as an idea for Africa. He says, small farmers don't have a place, let's have corporate farming. So where would you want the small farmers to go? You don't have urban jobs. You don't have, how are you going to do the transition for non-farm jobs? So that would be okay. Even Europe is not going corporate farming. I mean, if you look at France, if you look at Spain, if you look at any of these countries, they are still having their farmers in place. So the question is, yes, Europe is usually subsidized. We know that. But at the same time, people want to farm. I mean, they have options, but they want to farm. And I think what we need to do is give our farmers that opportunity of farming better, farming more, not just ecologically, but more economically profitable. And then you have the question of gender, which is never asked and answered by anybody who's promoting corporate farming. What are you going to do with the 75% of women who are dependent on agriculture in rural areas? So that would be, it's both a growth and equity issue, but it's also an issue of, do you want an agriculture which is better ecological, more inclusive, and addresses the larger issue of employment and livelihoods in the country and poverty.
Hi, Professor here. Yes. Thank you for the lecture. I am Prachi Bansal. I'm a colleague here in JSGP. My question is that, okay, group farming is one solution, but are we like land reforms is no more a thing we are advocating for, or is that not on the agenda anymore? Thank you.
I don't, it depends on what you think of as land reform, right? So land reform had a range of components when we carried it out in the 1960s. One component was you redistributed land from the larger farmer. You said, well, this is the ceiling, and anybody owning land above the ceiling would get minimum compensation, and you would then take that land and distribute it among the landless. Another was land to the tiller. So instead of, we thought of the relationship between landlord and tenant farmers is exploitative. So we built into our constitution, in fact, in all our land reforms, that tenancy, we actually banned tenancy, which is a bad thing. I mean, today it just isn't working. And the third part of it was institutional. We thought, oh, we'll do cooperative farming. We'll have cooperatives as well. So the first two, I don't think we are talking about redistributed land reform. I think we are well past that. I do think we can have land reform in relation to rethinking our ability to recognize tenancy as legal. What is the problem with these laws? Now, the problem with these laws is that if you look at any of these laws, take UP, which is a classic example, that if the tenant has been there and can prove that they've been there for a certain period of time, then they get ownership to the land. And so landlords don't want formal tenancies. There's a lot of informal tenancy happening everywhere, but it's not formalized, which means it's insecure for the tenant, and you can't take advantage of subsidies. So for instance, even in Kerala, these women who are farming, they can't prove they are farmers to get subsidies because they're not owners of the land. So now the solution they found is let's give them certificates to say they are indeed the farmers. So that part of land reform is there. And I would say rethinking cooperative farming, I don't like using the word cooperative because it means so many things. Group farming is actually the unfinished agenda of the original idea of land reform, which we happily forget. There's somebody minding? Okay, I'll just, yes, her and then you, yeah.
Hi, Professor. I'm Kopal, and I've just completed PhD from BITS Pilani Hyderabad campus, and I'm joining.
Talk louder. I'm just out of hearing.
Yeah, I'm Kopal, and I've just completed research from BITS Pilani Hyderabad campus, and I'm joining IRMA soon. And the case that you mentioned in your presentation regarding Amul and organizing milk producers is truly inspiring. And ma'am, I have a follow-up question to the previous one, that you also spoke about clear mechanism regarding conflict resolution. So speaking of land reforms, so my question is on land holdings among Dalit households. So according to NSSO 70th round, 54% of the Dalit households do not own land other than homestead. So which is really low. And after accounting for the land ceiling, which is 20 acres, there are 76 lakh hectares extra land available for redistribution. So how do you account for the power dynamics in cooperative farming? So would you please...
So let's separate this out. I mean, where are you getting this 76?
It's a paper by, it's a paper in...
So it's a particular area.
So it's a like analysis across the India, NSSO 70th, 70th round by Anand in Economic Political Weekly. It's a paper by somebody.
So fine. I mean, I don't have those figures. I know that Ekta Parishad, for instance, did a land yatra across the country, and they went from area to area, and they actually mapped out how much of surplus land there is. The real question is, so I can't speak for the data, but the real problem is that there are parts where the government has redistributed land. So two things have happened on land redistribution, apart from what happened in the 60s. That under Indira Gandhi's regime, for instance, as part of the anti-poverty programs, they started redistributing land to the landless. And NS Jodha's work across all of semi-arid India showed that 80% of that land that was redistributed was from the common land, which people were using for grazing, for all these sort of inputs, green manure and so on, which were useful for farming. And in the Punjab, for instance, you have Dalits have a right to cultivate common land. I think they auction it periodically, which hasn't been happening. There's been agitations on that. So distributing the commons to private individuals, most of that land, according to Jodha's work, actually went to the larger farmers. So that's not what we want, right? The second is that there you have granular examples where women's groups have tried to get land for women, and they find that a lot of that land has so much is so arid. It has no water. It has stones, and the rights to them have not been formally distributed. So I'm saying that we can take these aggregate figures, but what we really need to know is what kind of land is it? Where is it available? Is it really usable for cultivation? Maybe we should be doing horticulture in it. I'm just saying that it's good if there's still some surplus land, but overall that's still not very much, right? And so here's an alternative, which is let's reform the tenancy laws, and then let's promote land leasing in a more formal way, and let's use our SHG type of bottom-up groups to allow them to make a livelihood out of it. This is not the only answer. I mean, I've said there are many other things which the government has to do, irrigation, research, and all of that. But this is one of the institutional answer, I believe, to make some of the other things work, irrigation work and so on. So let's take, there's this, and then there are 3 questions. Let's take them all together. Yeah. Yes, Stephen, you're fourth. Please. No.
Thank you, Professor, for this really fascinating presentation. I'm Naveen Thomas, and I'm a faculty here. So are we looking at cooperative farming as our A game for the problems that we are seeing in agriculture, or is it a coping mechanism? Because it seems like a coping mechanism. And the other thing that we know, I mean, at least in the limited fieldwork that I've done, agricultural work is not aspirational work. It's never going to be aspirational work at the scales that these operate at, because it's really hard work. So work in the city whenever it's available is more preferred. So is this a coping mechanism, or are we sort of thinking of this as more than a coping mechanism, as an, is there more to it than that?
What we have today in agriculture is a coping mechanism. I mean, 50% of farmers' children become farmers, and they're still deeply unhappy. That is coping. This is inspirational. If you see the figures, I mean, do read the papers, see if you're convinced, and look at all the econometric work. And if you have group farms which are producing 1.8 times per annual value of output to individual family farms, they feel empowered as individuals. They feel technically more capable. They are able to negotiate the political space so this is not coping. This is an alternative. And also we must think that, okay, what is your answer to agriculture? So if you go to the Plan Niti Aayog, they will say, yes, irrigation. I mean, everybody's talking about irrigation. Why is it not happening? Are there other ways of irrigating? That's really the question. So I would say this is not about coping. This is to move away from coping. And yes, it has to be technically sophisticated. It should excite you. And there's so much new technology involved in farming today. Let's bring it in. See it as an enterprise, which could have profits. Santosh Vanant. There was a woman there. Okay, no. There's Sahu, there's Stephen, there's Santosh. Okay. Prabhakar, put your hand up.
Thank you so much for an excellent talk. I have a very simple question, ma'am. One of the issues we are dealing with for some time is the slowdown of final consumption expenditure. And that is because most of the people in rural India, they are suffering from low and uncertain income. Mostly those are in agriculture. One of the issues, it's a structural issue that uh, the agricultural sector or most of the farmers, they mostly focus on cereals, particularly rice and wheat. When there is an increasing demand from the urban sector on horticulture products, livestock, and cash crops. So, how do we really go about, motivating farmers to move away from what you call horticulture, livestock, and commercial crops? Anything, any thoughts? Thanks.
No, I agree. I mean, I think you came in after my agroecology slide. But I done that. So I would first have echo. Could you shut up? So yeah, better. No, it's still echoing. Band kar dijiye se. है ना? Can you? This is better. So I agree with you. I think So I'll give you one actually granular example. Sorry, he's gone out. Okay. I'll give you a granular example. So in this World Development paper where I compared, I did not just Kerala, but I looked at Telangana also. And it was they were doing group farming, all women group farming. And what was very interesting is that the Telangana results were not as good as Kerala's. For various reasons, which I talk about. I mean, the groups are very large. An important reason was they were pushing food crops. But when they were doing cotton, their results were very good. The all-women groups were better than the individual farmers. But when they were doing only food crops, it wasn't the case. So I think we need to diversify. And I agree with that. And you're sitting in the Niti Aayog. I think you should push that too. Yeah, okay. Stephen.
Are there any questions online?
Oh, no, yes, online.
Okay.
Yes.
First, we'll go to Professor Marks.
Let's take some online. And then so we'll have all the answers.
I learned a tremendous amount from this analysis and presentation. I have two questions. One is revealing my ignorance. It's a definitional question. The principle rethinking and focusing on the institutional change through group farming. I'm not quite clear on how that differs from cooperatives. And there's probably a definitional issue that's quite simple that I missed. If you could clarify that. The second point is how India-specific this analysis is. I'm sure that small farming and the different problems that were identified, the challenges of climate change and gender inequality and land degradation and so on, exists in other parts of the world. Is there any comparative analysis where the particular ways of rethinking that is based upon the diverse situations you've analyzed in India would be relevant to other regions of the world, and has FAO, for example, embraced this approach to rethinking the problem of small farming and gender distinctions? I hope that question is clear.
Yeah,
on that.
Thank you. They're very clear. You see, I don't use the words cooperatives for the reasons I mentioned, because they mean everything to everybody. Group farming is a descriptive term, and it's rather difficult to, a group is farming together. That's minimal. So as I said, we have a history of talking about cooperatives and cooperative farming in diverse ways. So in the 1960s, post-colonial countries, Asia, Africa, Latin America, everybody thought, yes, we should promote cooperative farming. Tanzania went Ujamaa. I mean, entire villages had to cooperate. In India, in the Punjab, if you read the documents, you'll find they said the whole village should cooperate. Excuse me, you have very large farmers and you have very small farmers, you expect them to sit down and cooperate and think it's joint decision making. So I'm saying that how does it differ depends on which model you have in mind, right? And that's why I distinguish this, that it is bottom up, it's homogeneous, it's small groups, it's voluntary, it's equitable sharing of costs and benefits, all of that. Some of these you'll read into, as I said, Ostrom's design principles, but she was talking about common pool resources. Free riding in common pool resources is somewhat less costly than free riding in private property resources, because if 6 of us got together and Sudarshan says he's got duties in his office and he's not going to turn up for work, now that'll be disastrous if he's responsible for actually doing the weeding that day. Whereas if somebody doesn't turn up for looking after a forest for a patrol group, it's not such a problem. So there are many differences, Steve. And I've also talked about marketing versus other. There are examples in other countries. In fact, the work I'm doing is more global. I've done quite detailed, intensive work on France and in Romania. France, for instance, has a very long history of group farming. They call them GAECs. They started in the 1950s by the young Catholic farmers movement, and they wanted modernization of agriculture, but they also wanted something which was between capitalist farming and small farmers. So they wanted community involved. So they launched this program of group farming. Do you know what proportion of French farmers are group farms? GAECs, 21%. And they have this federated structure. So there's a federation of GAECs and so on. So Romania is a very interesting example as well, because decollectivization, they gave them, all the collectives were dismantled. They gave them little slivers of land, which was so tiny that it was uneconomical. So neighbors and friends got together and they voluntarily cultivated. And I cite 4 studies in Romania, East Germany, Nicaragua, and one other country, where the productivity was much better in group farms compared to the, those who were continuing to do small slivers of farming. So there are many examples. I just want to say one more thing, that we think of Europe as large-scale farming, but did you know that something like 49% of farmers in Europe cultivate less than 5 hectares. I think some are much smaller, sometimes 2 hectares. So, but I'm not pushing this on that. I think the sub-Saharan Africa, there's a great possibility. And also parts of Europe, parts of Spain, parts of, as I said, Romania. There are a few other countries, Portugal, where you have lots of small farms where the model could work. Of course, you have to get over the skepticism. FAO moves by themes. So one year it's promoting family farming. Next year it's promoting cooperatives. I think it needs to get over this divergence, because you can't have both. You have to push one. So I think, Santosh, yeah, Santosh will have all the answers that I couldn't answer.
No, Santosh Mehrotra, I taught economics in Jawaharlal Nehru University. Very briefly, thank you, first of all, for a very good presentation. Very briefly, you rightly mentioned the role of technology and the overuse of groundwater and surface water. Would you like to spell out why you think sprinkler technology and drip irrigation has not spread in India? Has it not been subsidized enough? What is the problem? Because we could partly deal with the shortage of water through that. Thank you.
So that's a good question, Santosh. I can't answer on why it hasn't spread. I mean, ICAR can answer it. I mean, these figures are absolutely low. The easier question is, why hasn't irrigation spread? I mean, why have we only have 49%, or maybe now in Niti Aayog, the figures are 50% of irrigated areas irrigated. So if the technology is very simple, Santosh, the technology, as you say, is very simple. I mean, you and I can do it. We make holes in a pipe and we lay them out in lines, and we have it. I think like many other aspects of government policy, it's worth at least a doctoral dissertation, maybe more, to see that. And it will be very nice later to hear from you about the potential for rural non-farm and whether any of these ideas make sense. Okay, so I think everybody's
Ma'am,
looking at their watch. So
yeah, hi, ma'am, we have one question online.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
role of CSR in agricultural extension. This is Varun Miglani, SSC Pune.
Role of corporate social
Yes,
uh,
corporate
in
social. In agricultural extension. Social
corporate
responsibility.
social responsibility. Well, I can't say about agriculture. Why would they enter into agricultural extension? There are many other bigger things they can do. I mean, I was actually, if you don't mind my saying so, Sudarshan, I was just wondering, why not create a mini forest? You've got 80 acres of land. Am I right? Huh? 100 acres. You have 100 acres of land in Jindal University. If you created a buffer zone of forests, not ferns, just around campus, look at the microclimate you'll create. So, you know, since the university also draws on, yes, exactly. There are many big ideas that they could take up. Thank you. You're getting late. Huh?
Last question to me. Beena, thanks a lot for a very comprehensive presentation. Two short questions. One is, you didn't say much about the marketing side. You talked a lot about the production. So I was worrying about, you know, you increase output, agricultural output, and you get less income at the end of the day because the marketing side, where are they going to sell all this stuff? If you were wildly successful with all the recommendations and productivity really increase in terms of output, unless they can sell way beyond the immediate markets, they are not likely to get good returns. So you must have thought that through. If you can share that with me. The other point is this classical economist dilemma, that is when at the planning level, let us say the economic advisors to the prime minister are looking at the economy as a whole, and they say, look, agricultural contribution is a very sort of low productivity economically. We are looking at 2047. It doesn't make too much sense to do much about agriculture, excepting that we must make sure that it continues to support livelihoods for people. So it's a social thing more than an economic contributor. So how are we going to deal with that at that policy level? Because it's a real problem that one might have to deal with from a policy perspective. So those two things.
So on marketing, you see, where are the issues of marketing? I mean, nobody. So here's a much more complex thing, that farmers respond to prices. You know, so what they produce is not that they just sit down and say, we're just going to endlessly produce X, and if you produce a surplus, there's not going to be any buyers. That's not how it happens. I mean, for instance, in Europe, what farmers produce is hugely driven by the price manipulation. I mean, you must have seen farmers, throw away milk to keep the price intact. I'm just saying that it's not a one-way street that you sit and produce and then you decide to go marketing. So you do respond to market signals. The second is we already have those signals. So take vegetable farming. Now, in many of these youth groups in Bihar, it's a 3-month crop. You get irrigation. You have instant marketing. So I'm saying that if you have a diversity of produce, and you're not just talking about wheat and rice and the minimum support price route, and you diversify, you will get the markets. Where does the group come in? A group is better able to negotiate in those markets and get a sense of the markets as well. What I found in my research, even in Kerala, is that they were better able to deliver on contracts. So, for instance, there's a particular kind of banana which is needed in festive seasons, which is bought by temples. So they entered into contracts with the temples and say, we'll deliver. They were able to deliver both in terms of, because the temple administration knew they're a group and they will deliver. You don't have the same confidence if you're a 35-cent individual family farm. And remember, Kerala and Tamil Nadu are among the big producers of banana in India. So I'm saying that if we can think of marketing in multiple ways, then aggregation is going to help. And even in my model, let all these small groups produce enough and they form an FPO for marketing, for which actually the government is giving subsidies. Forming FPOs is getting huge subsidies. You could set up a shop. The second question, that is how you look at agriculture. I'm just saying rethink agriculture. How do you influence the government? You tell me. I mean, I used to influence the government by being part of directly, giving recommendations to the Planning Commission when it was a Planning Commission, and you could go and give recommendations. I headed the 12th five-year plan working group on disadvantaged farmers, including women. All these recommendations are there. You can download the document that we submitted. The other is you talk to key individuals in the Planning Commission. I talk to key individuals as well, over informal settings. And the third is you write edit page pieces. Now that's about what you can do, and then there are the farmers. The one thing is that, the farmers are agitating for higher prices. I feel they should really be agitating for production support so that they are, to be much more inclusive of all the farmers who are not making it. So I feel the collective action is a great thing, but we need to then see what are you doing collective action for. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're going to eat into coffee time, as always, very often happens. That's a bit of a leeway that we have. So I think we'll convene the interesting panel that's going to talk about the next 5 years. So I'd like to invite Ratin, Madhura, Prabhakar, and Shiv to come up here. And we'll have a discussion. So we've given ourselves a little time by. Okay. So this is a kind of an open-ended panel discussion because of the time when this is happening, when we've got a new government that will take office, and a government that's going to be significantly different in that it's back to a coalition government. And so we've got, thoughtful people to provoke more thought. That's the idea of this panel. So without, taking up, trying to elaborate on what might be said, I'll just start off with Ratin. We've been watching him on television to tell us what might we expect in the next 5 years.
10 minutes, very good. Thank you, Sudarshan. Thank you for inviting me back to Jindal. Professor Agarwal, I have to tell you that the place is far greener than when I first came. It almost may not be Haryana anymore. I was quite impressed and I was also impressed that all those muscular national flags that I saw first have been dwarfed by the trees. And that is probably a good sign of what is portended for this country in the future. More trees, less flags, I think is generally a good idea. So What of the next 5 years? Well, that all depends on who you believe on what happened in the last 5 years. And those of you who read me know what I think. I consult in the private sector. I'm fond of money. So I consult with the private sector. And when I consult with them, I tell them, just to give you an example, that the stock market in India is going to boom and is going to keep on booming as long as you have a BJP government in power. You may have it booming when you have a Congress government in power, I don't know. But as long as the BJP is in power, it will boom. Because across the last 5 years, what you have seen is an immeasurizing increase in inequality in this country in every dimension. If you look at the flip side, on the income side, 80 listed companies are making more profits than everybody else who's trying to make profits. So people who own equity are getting money, but they don't need to borrow to do more business to get money. Therefore, people who put money into places like banks are getting lower returns. The returns to capital are low. Companies are going debt-free, which means that they're not actually producing more to make more money. In fact, in COVID, they were making more money by producing less. And wages in every sector are more or less stagnant. Forget unemployment, that's high. But even if you get paid, you're not getting paid, much more than you were getting paid 8 years ago. And inflation means that prices have almost doubled. So in those circumstances, if capital is not getting returns and labor is not getting returns, of course, equity is going to boom. And equity, you're talking at best, generously speaking, 10% of the economy. Because 90% of my economy is what the Prime Minister calls the samosa wala economy, or when he's in a bad mood or feeling bigoted, the puncture wala economy, right? That is 90% of the economy. So they're not in the profits game. So if wages are declining and returns to capital are declining, then this Viksit Bharat depends on where you stand and where you live, or aapki Viksitta kahan se aa rahi hai. So in that respect, I think in the next 5 years, if this continues, I see the challenge as being more or less the same as it was in the past 5 years. But it has an implication for all of us. Not me, I'll be dead. It's a bit like climate change. But in 2047, if you have children and if you're interested in what happens to this country when more or less everyone on this panel, except perhaps the last gentleman, is dead, the question you've got to ask is, let me put it in very commonplace, non-economic terms, it works. I grew up in Bollywood, so please forgive me. I have a movie, I think of everything like a movie. So this development game, if you look at it as an 18-reel, as we say in the old days before digital, 18-reel movie, normally has a tragic ending. Happy ending bahut kam hai. Happy ending South Korea, happy ending Taiwan, happy ending France, happy ending Western Europe post-war, maybe happy ending China. I don't know. I have still to watch. Picture baki hai. But the great thing about my life was that India, unlike, take all the sad ending cases, all permanent basket cases now, I've lived in some of them, Brazil, Argentina, Egypt, Mexico, Thailand, Philippines. They've all had tragic endings. They've hit $10,000 per capita, $15,000 per capita, in Mexico's case, 25,000. Massive poverty, massive volatility in people's lives and livelihoods. Children, not all children well-fed, not just a few, not enough to cover in a safety net. Healthcare lagging for the many. In Brazil, where I live, people commuting to each other's dinner parties in helicopters, while you have, Gini coefficients of 0.8. And that continues every day. So some people are happy. If you have a helicopter, you're very happy. That is what I call a bad ending picture, because it's bad ending for 80% of people. And this is quite typical. I don't know why people don't get it. This is what normally happens in the world in my lifetime. Okay. Movie kharab hoti hai, tragic ending hoti hai, hero mar jata hai. So, but all my life, and I'm 57, I was always saying picture baki hai. But what has happened in the last 5 years is that this picture has been moving in the way I described, into this very sordid place of a bad ending. In Hindi, we use a word, and you use the word a lot, Beena. I think that's very important, and we don't take it seriously. participation. The Hindi translation of that is better. It is bhagidari. And I think what this election sent out a very important economic message. People are saying it's not about the economy, stupid. It's all sorts of filmy things, which I like as a filmy person, but pride and, they talk down. No, it's all about the economy. What people are saying very clearly, and this is something I've written about, is I don't care how much growth you're getting, and I don't even care how much I benefit from it. I want to be part of the process of growing. मुझे लाभार्थी नहीं बनना है. I do not want to be a beneficiary. And this is beyond BJP and Congress. This is a problem that has exacerbated in the last 5 years. But I remember when I came back, I keep leaving the country and coming back for my sins. So when I came back the last time to work in the Finance Commission, this Darega business had just started. And I mean, I like Darega, it's a good idea, but I was very puzzled because India was growing like bonkers. Okay, and everyone was telling me what a great place it was in India, dream, and people were all freaking out. So I said, okay, if everyone is freaking out and India is growing like bonkers, of all times now, why do you need an unemployment guarantee scheme? And I asked Montek and people like that, very, very senior economists, and they didn't give me, all economists tell you something without telling you anything. So they gave me that kind of answer, and I'm old enough now to know. I said, okay, this guy doesn't know, but he's presenting me with a lot of disconnected data, and he's giving me sort of interesting stylized facts, interspersed with what passes for political economy. So in this country, what has happened since liberalization, and I think that I'll conclude with that, that is our challenge for the next 5 years, is that we have moved from being from having a state, since it's the post-election you're talking about, that is a development state. It's very depressing for me, to a state that has essentially become a compensatory state. By which I mean that the object of government policy now is not to transform people's lives by getting them to participate in the transformative business, which is how any neoclassical economist would want the country to work, but to compensate them for not having the incomes and opportunities to participate in what has been a highly unequalizing business by throwing money at them, by feeding 800 million people, by running a Narega, by providing subsidies for health, by providing, I'm not saying these are bad things. I'm saying these things are a consequence of people not being able to do what I can do. When I was in the UN, I found everybody in the UN was a great advocate of public health, but none of us went to public health. We all had private insurance. So this is a very bizarre situation. Everyone who advocates for universal education sends their children to private school, including all BJP politicians, English medium. So, and they send them abroad. So in this situation where a few have essentially benefited hugely from growth and the rest have been compensated for not benefiting, you are going to end up in that Brazilian, Mexican middle income trap as the poorest country ever to be in a middle income trap. And that is a terrifying future. I'd be dead for, your children and the children of your children to be in, because it's very depressing to be a Brazilian on the wrong side of that divide, I can assure you. Therefore, I think the challenge in the next 5 years, and I'll stop with a quick word on solutions, is for economists to get out of lazy solutions. Let me give you 3 lazy solutions. Export-led growth. When Mahatma Gandhi went to London, he was asked something about Western civilization, what he thought of it. And he said, I think it would be a very good idea. Similarly, I think export-led growth would be a very good idea. But I asked younger people here, I waited for it all my life. All right, it's never come. So it's a very good idea. If you bring it, I'm very happy. But in the interim, what am I supposed to do? That is one. The second is this, what I'm so glad Professor Agarwal mentioned, this very arrogant attitude economists have got. It's a bit like the multipliers. Someone's presenting a paper on fiscal multipliers. I look forward to understanding the theory. There is no theory of the multiplier that divides it into its impact. The multiplier in economic theory is is indifferent to whether you invest the money in a brothel or in a bridge. It doesn't matter macroeconomically. Okay, it's a delta. Similarly, when you talk about things like people must move out of agriculture into manufacturing and services. Why? I mean, why did you ask them? I mean, if the farmer is unhappy, then I can understand. That's a valid reason. But why should people simply move out? Because you don't make the kind of extractive money that you do in agriculture that you do in manufacturing and services. And that is not a good enough reason for people to move out of agriculture. Why are railways so overburdened? Why are people migrating thousands of kilometers from UP and Bihar to Tamil Nadu and Kerala And while people from Kerala migrate to the Gulf and that sort of thing, of course. Why do you have this chain of migration where Tamil Nadu and Kerala become a third-class Dubai? And then they move to a second-class Dubai and then the first-class Dubai. What is happening here? What is happening here is that our economic model has forgotten to ask a simple question. And I'll conclude with this if I have 2 more minutes. Let me say something that people are not going to like. I have a lot of sympathy for poor people. But let me tell you that they're not very important for economic transformation. That's why you want to get rid of poverty. It's very important to get rid of poverty because poor people are a pain. They don't play a role. All you can do is compensate them. And therefore, it's very frightening when we're compensating 80% of our population with food grains. It tells me that. So the thing is to get people out of poverty by giving them decent jobs, improve their livelihoods. But once you've done that, right? I'm earning, let's say, the minimum wage in India, anywhere I live, or twice the minimum wages. You know, I have every right, surely, to expect if I'm earning a minimum wage, that I'll be able to at least consume the following 5 things. I want to eat a decent meal without subsidy. Okay? I want to wear clothes that are made in my country, and I want to be able to afford to buy them. I want to have EMIs like just you and me. I don't want Labharthi. I don't want Awas Yojana and Kubas Yojana. I want to buy a house for my kids to live in. If I don't have a volatile life, I want to have a 5 lakh house or 10 lakh house, and I want to pay EMI, boss, just like you. All right. I want to have a decent healthcare, however it's provided, publicly, privately. I want a reasonable amount of healthcare, and I want my kids to get a reasonable amount of education. 5 things. If you look at the indicators, leading indicators of the Indian economy, none of these 5 things are the leading indicators produced by Bombay. What is there? FMCG, automobile, aviation. What's going on here? What that means basically, therefore, is that the effective demand, not of the bottom 500 million, even of the top 150 to 500 million, is irrelevant to my growth and transformation process. You will not get inclusive growth unless that demand is part of your leading indicators. Agriculture, we have lots of experts here. Less said, the better. I'll just tell you that in NIPFP, when I was director there, I had 9 researchers spending 2 years trying to calculate the cost of an unsubsidized square meal. No subsidy whatsoever. And I failed. Do you blame the farmer for committing suicide? The guy has no autonomy. Morning to night, you're telling him, you know, what to produce, how to produce. When the price of onions go up, you impose bans on it. So agriculture is a mess and we need to derive value from it. Shirts, textiles. This shirt costs 3,000 rupees. It's Marks and Spencer. It's made in India. Mera Bharat Viksit or Mahan. Try and go and buy a 200, 300 rupee shirt outside. 82% of them are made in Bangladesh and Vietnam. Okay? Housing. I can get an EMI for a house in Gurgaon. Now, somebody will tell me there's an IIFL which is giving 21.5 loans every year. But at scale, you are not getting loans to build 5 lakh and 10 lakh houses in this country. Health business model has failed. Education business model has failed. So I'd say the challenge in the next 5 years is this. If we don't want to be a middle income country, if we want to be a country that has inclusive transformative growth, if we want this movie to have a happy ending, and we don't want to end up like Brazil, these 5 things will have to constitute at least 60% of our growth going forward. The remaining can come from exports and from lipstick and from aviation and Indigo Airlines and all that. But if 60 to 70% of our growth, whatever the growth rate is, does not come from here, ये picture fails. लेकिन अभी picture बाकी है. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, Madhura. Yes, please. Yeah.
Yes, pick up like this. First, big thank you to Professor Sudarshan, the deans, Vice Chancellor is not here, and Jindal Global University for inviting me. And very impressed with my walk around the campus today. So maybe I will come back if invited or uninvited. So let me talk about, talking about the next 5 years. I'm making a mess here. I think taking off a little bit from what the previous speaker said, question I'm going to raise today is, what are the constraints to economic transformation in India? And I think we had one set of constraints put out there. And what I want to say is a very simple point. Unless we recognize and address gender and caste discrimination, we are not going to have true economic transformation. And this is my main point. Those of you, have to leave can leave, because I think this is something which we can talk about for hours, but I'll try to just give a few examples in the next 10 or 15 minutes, so that should tell me when to stop. And I work in rural India on rural economy, so I'll give some examples from rural India. Let's take women's work. And I want to put out a number, 75 hours. What is 75 hours? We did a time use study in Karnataka. 75 hours is a women's working week. I think that's easy to get. Now, this, of course, includes work in what is called economic activity, or under our system of national accounts. It also includes what is now called extended SNA, that is the care work, cooking, cleaning, taking care of elderly children, etc., which is essential for household reproduction. Now, this number varies across women by caste, by season. So we can look at variations. That's not the issue. I think the point, the striking thing is women are working, rural women in India, and I think there's a generalization I can make, even if it's a few villages we've studied, are working around 75 hours a week. Some of them work 88. I was shocked, it's just amazing. 88, both SNA and extended SNA. And is this work recognized? That's the first question. Paid, underpaid, unpaid, overworked. So I think we can go into each of these components, the overworked, the underpaid, no payment. But let me give one example only here, which relates, I think, to the last point being made. Because I think a very good measure of absolute poverty, which is being used in the literature on food and nutrition security, is what is the cost of a healthy diet? Because we're no longer talking about minimum calories. We're talking about proteins, nutrients, macronutrients, etc. Now, since 2023, the FAO has been coming out with what they call cost of a healthy diet. And for India, IFPRI has worked out, thank you, what is the cost based on the Indian National Institute of Nutrition recommendation, cost of a recommended diet. Of course, this was for 2011, because we don't have consumer expenditure data on expenditures, prices, commodities after that. But let's take it for what it was. And in Gujarat, the cost of a recommended diet, a basic healthy diet at local prices, was 42 rupees a day at 2011 prices. And guess what? The wage of a daily worker, unskilled woman worker, was 42 rupees. In other words, not that you get employment for even every day of the year, but even the day you get work, your entire wage would have to go if you really had to have a healthy diet. I think, Ratin, this is an important set of findings. We can go into other states. In Bihar, it was 97%. In Kerala, it was 70%. It was better for men because men's wages are higher. It was 2/3, 66 to 67% of a daily wage worker, male worker's wage would go into buying a healthy diet. In Bihar and Gujarat, it was 19% in Kerala. So Kerala was a little bit of an exception, as we know. And actually, I don't want to say exception, because Kerala has made an achievement. If we keep calling it an exception, we take away from those achievements. So we are talking about 200 million. It's anywhere between 170 to 190 if we take an augmented work participation rate definition. We can discuss that, those of you interested. About 200 million women workers in economic activity. I'm not talking now about the care activity, who are earning this kind of absolutely desperate wages. And as has already been mentioned, one of the things, the last 10, 15 years have been a period of wage stagnation, even rural wages. So although we don't have the consumption expenditure survey after 2011, one of my young colleagues, Arindam Das, had done a calculation. Where is that? But I think over the last 5 years, rural women's wages have increased something like 0.3% per annum. And in absolute terms, real wages between, I had written this down somewhere, between 2017-18 and 22-23 rose by 10 rupees. 10 rupees is the real wage increase over the last 5 years for a rural woman worker. Okay, now we can go into more examples, but I think, and more elaboration, but I think yeah, oh, thank you. No, the point is that rural women who are engaged in enormous number of hours of work are not recognized as workers. When they're recognized, when they actually engage in wage employment, they're paid, absolutely pathetic wage. And many women workers are engaged in family labor, that is on their looking after their own animals, livestock, or on their own, ducks and goats, or on their own farming on their own family farm. And recent studies shows that returns to a woman engaged in livestock farming in Haryana is actually much, much lower than the daily wage rate. So even here, where we see that the increase in employment, as many of you know, the labor force participation rate for women is because of self-employment has gone up. I think the economists here know these numbers, but that's actually at a much lower, implicit wage. So I think this is the first point I wanted to make, that unless the working women of India are part of the development transition, we're not really going to see development. The second point I want to make is about caste discrimination. And I think we know caste discrimination persists. I want to talk about caste discrimination in the economic sphere, because today we're talking about economics and public policy, not about, this horrific violence, there's all kinds of things happening, but how does caste discrimination affect economic outcomes? And I must mention here, I think Professor Sukhdev Thorat and his colleagues and students have done enormous amount of work of the 20 years, not enormous, have done substantial work, but still the literature, if you look at caste discrimination in the economic sphere, particularly in agriculture, in crop farming, I think there are about a handful. We did a literature search recently, maybe 5 or 6 papers in India. So that's really very, very tiny. Now, what discrimination occurs in the economic sphere in 2 ways. One is through the market, through private transactions, and the other, which Thorat calls non-market sphere, but I prefer calling public policy. And I think that's what it's relevant here to all those of you studying public policy. Discrimination occurs through public policy. Now, we have data. We have a lot of data. We have macro data, we have micro data, and I can give some examples from some of the places we've studied, particularly a recent study we did in Tamil Nadu, because Tamil Nadu is a relatively advanced state, manufacturing state, and advanced on many indicators of economic development and human development. But we found persistent differences in outcomes, economic outcomes, be it landholding, be it asset ownership, be it the occupational choice. If you look at the proportion of workers who engage in unskilled manual wage labor, scheduled castes versus the main other group in this village was backward classes, BC, the systematic differences. So I think, and this is a study we did in 2019, just before the pandemic. So we're not talking about 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We were talking about contemporary rural India. And I think those of you who have been to rural India or done field work will not be surprised by what I'm saying. So we see systematic differences in occupational choices, in income generation, in crop incomes. V. Surjit, who is one of the first people to have looked at caste discrimination, I think, in crop farming, has shown that statistically significant differences in yields, in prices received, therefore in gross value of output, and net returns as between scheduled caste cultivators and others. And these are for many reasons. We can go into them, like tenancy being one of the things. Many of the landless Dalits actually have to lease in land. So that comes with a lot of additional costs. Or it may be because they don't own their own tractors. They're poor, and therefore they have to hire in tractors and so on. Or they have to sell their output as soon as the harvest. And so they're not able to get as good a price. So the reasons vary, but you find systematic differences. And this was really surprising, particularly in Tamil Nadu. We didn't expect to see this kind of result. So what are I have a couple of minutes? Yeah. I want to just take a couple of more minutes to say that we need to go beyond this. We need to go beyond studying differential outcomes, because we want to know what are the processes, because unless we identify what is a process leading to economic discrimination, we cannot have public policy to address that. And the National Academy of Sciences has done a very good report, for those of you interested, it's a little old, on measuring racial discrimination. And they identified 3 forms of discrimination. One is what we could call direct or differential treatment. You're a scheduled caste, you're not going to get this job, or I'm not going to hire the tractor out to you, and so on. Second is what they call differential effect or differential treatment effect, which is kind of indirect. And a recent example, a student of mine has worked in Maharashtra, is that a lot of the Dalit households cultivate wasteland or grazing land. Now, this land called Gairan land in Maharashtra, the terms and conditions on which credit is given to Gairan land is in policy different from that on which credit is given to other cropland. There's something called the scale of finance. Every year, the bankers committee decides how much credit per crop. And this is distinct. So we've actually built in system. I mean, the policymaker will say, no, this is not against Dalit. This is Gairan land and cropland. But if only Dalits are owning and cultivating Gairan land, then it is what we call indirect or differential effects. So it's not on the basis of caste, but it actually turns out to be, almost. And the third is very, very important, is cumulative deprivation. So cumulative deprivation or cumulative disadvantage is discrimination working over time across generations. I saw a recent paper on mobility in India, which says there's been hardly over the last 50 years, hardly any mobility. I just saw this yesterday, but it's also across domains. Discrimination in education then results in discrimination in jobs. And so discrimination in access to land, for example, in rural area, then results in discrimination access to credit. And then there's discrimination in the extension service, which somebody was asking about agricultural extension. Even the public agricultural extension officers don't reach there. I'd be surprised if CSR made an effort. So discrimination across domains. And again, I can go into examples. These are from very specific small studies across villages in India. And Professor Thorat has done a study in 3 states, again, with a couple of 100 farmers. So we need to do this on a much larger scale. So I would say that, I conclude with this, that, and we can discuss this later if we like, that we need to get more data, whether it's on women's work, whether it's on caste discrimination, because data, I know this is one of the things in the last 10 years, the data in India has been really, the value of data has been undermined. I hope that will be reversed, but not just, we need to get more types of data, we need to get data on more indicators. The last point is, and I think that's very, very important for public policy students over here and researchers, that unless, public policy, whether it's minimum support price, it's not caste and gender unbiased. There is discrimination, but we're not looking for it. We think there's one fertilizer policy. A student of mine went through the National Livestock Policy of 2002. Gender is not mentioned. We were not surprised, but then that means you're not, till you recognize discrimination, you're not going to address it through public policy. So I hope some students here in Jindal will take that up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mathura. Thank you. Do you want to sit over there? You're more comfortable? This is a very stiff back. Yeah, yes. Yeah, so yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask Shiv for your reflections. This has been fascinating so far.
Thank you very much. I think the discussion so far has been fantastic. Let me build on some of the ideas that have come up. In fact, Madhura, I wanted to say that one of the things that we learn when you're looking at caste, gender is absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So I think we have to really look at it much more closely in whatever we are doing to factor in a perspective of rights, caste, gender, and so on. But let me go back to where Ratin started on the growth story. And I think we can't undermine the achievements of the contribution of growth. We do see physical improvements in people's standards of living. We see better infrastructure. I think in whatever way you are going to measure poverty, absolute poverty might have come down. But precariousness in the lives of people continues. But still, I think when you drive by the countryside and so on, even when I used to come from Delhi to Sonipat and to Ashoka, the entire place is transformed in a physical sense. But three things are important to note. That first is that, this thumping of the chest that we have become the 5th largest economy, we will become the 3rd largest economy, all that is because of economic growth, is a complete sham. Because if you look at the per capita income, our per capita income is only about $2,400 compared to United States, which is the largest economy with $80,000. So all the other countries above us, number 4, number 3, number 2, Japan, for instance, has a per capita income, how much is Japan? About $35,000, $40,000. So we're at $2,500. So we have to be modest about our achievements. The second thing which I want to say is this growth has created an extraordinary illusion of equality. And I'll give you a simple example today but this equality illusion has taken place in the space of commodities. So if today you line up 5 young people in Delhi, you will find that they're all dressed in a t-shirt, blue jeans, and sneakers. And it'll be very difficult for you to look at them and tell me who's coming from the slum and who's coming from the richest colony. In fact, you might often make a mistake because the person wearing the ripped jeans might actually be from the richest house. Similarly, if you look at a woman in the slum, she's able to cook the same 2-minute noodle for her child in the slum that you see a fancy woman on television cooking in a fancy kitchen for her child. Or a young woman is able to use the same shampoo because multinationals are marketing it at 5 rupees, 10 rupees sachets as the film star who's advertising. Now, this is a complete sham but it's a good thing also. I'm not denying people access to commodities, but the real test of development is what is happening in the space of opportunities and capabilities. And that is where, while there's a convergence in the space of commodities, there's a huge divergence in the space of capabilities. And I think that is the important thing. And some of the things that we have been talking about, take employment itself. By the way, in the literature, the Human Development Reports talk of 5 types of growth failures that don't get mesmerized by the quantity of growth, focus on the quality of growth. That growth does not automatically translate into human development. And the 5 types, and I won't explain all of them, jobless growth. Clearly, the situation of unemployment here is very serious. But it's interesting, the India Employment Report that comes out says that, of course, 90% of workers are still in the informal sector, and that's not a sign of development. Self-employment, as was mentioned, more than 55, 56% of people are in self-employed work. India's youth account for 83% of the unemployed workforce. And the youth unemployment is fascinating. So if you are If you're among those who cannot read and write, and you are a youth among the category of youth who cannot read and write, the unemployment rate is 3%. But if you have done, you're among the graduates, the unemployment rate is 29%. So it really calls to question, what is this education that we are getting? Why is it that nearly a third of the educated young people can't find jobs? Yeah. Ruthless growth was a term used for growing inequalities. I think much has been talked about, wealth accumulating to the rich and a majority of the poor not getting it. But let me give you a simple thing. Take health, for example. The life expectancy differential for female life expectancy differential for a woman born in Madhya Pradesh and Kerala is 11 years. There's 11-year life expectancy differential. And, we may talk of one nation, one ration, one nation, one election, but I think we really have to quickly move into one nation, one health, one nation, one education. That is the spirit with which we have to go forward. Madhura talked about gender gaps, and I think that's extremely important when you're talking about inequalities. ILO puts out data on female labor force participation rates for 111 countries. There are only 11 countries in the world. Even if you take the inflated number of the government of India at 37%, there are only 11 countries that report lower rates of female labor force participation than India. And guess what those countries are? What is a striking characteristic of those countries? Predominantly Muslim countries. So it is ironic that after that, we are number 11 or number 12. So I think, and the male-female differentials in labor force participation are striking. In India, it is 42%. 42%. That is 79% of, 79% of Indians and 37% of, men and 37% of women. In most other countries, it will be 12%, 14% higher among men than among women. The other terms in the literature were ruthless growth, voiceless growth. I think voiceless growth is again very striking because if there's one feature of development that we have observed in the last 10 years, it is a lack of voice and lack of participation and lack of people expressing what their frustrations are. And so growth cannot be sustained unless there is participation, democracy. Futureless growth, that was the other term of these 5 terms. Very interesting. New Delhi is, of course, the second most polluted capital city in the world. That's now taken for granted. And it's also taken for granted that we can do nothing about it because it depends on Rajasthan, it depends upon Haryana, it depends on what Gurgaon is doing and not Delhi. But a study by the shows on air quality that Delhi is losing 11.2 years because of poor air quality. 11.2 years. The average for India is about 5.3 years. If air quality were to be restored to what the WHO guidelines are, life expectancy in Delhi will go up by 11 years. So there are lots of things happening, but like I said, these are all such silent happenings in this country that we really don't know. So let me move quickly to the second part. So why is this happening and what can we do about it? I think the simple story is what all of us are trying to say is that policymakers have not realized that you have to push for an expansion of social opportunities alongside an expansion of economic opportunities for all. And I'll just take the example of health. It was also mentioned. Why is India doing so badly in health? I mean, if you look at indicators, and I won't bore you with more, take South Asia, with the exception of Afghanistan and Pakistan, we don't beat any other country on any indicator of health outcomes today. Why is this so? And if you ask me, the single most important reason is because the private sector, we have a large, unregulated, dominating private sector today. 93% of hospitals, 65% of beds, 85% of doctors work in the private sector. And this private sector is very suspicious. As Professor Sen says, we have no option. There are no good government facilities to go. There's an underinvestment in government sector. No country in the world has achieved anything close to universal healthcare without a strong public sector in health. So what are we talking about this private sector? And Professor Sen will say this person is caught between quackery and crookery. So on one hand, you have people who claim they are doctors, but don't have any medical degree. They don't even have class 10 certification. On the other hand, you have very high-end hospitals where it is so, we ourselves, whatever insurance you might have, think twice before going into a private hospital at the top end for treatment. In fact, in Delhi, most of us, if you have some condition, you will go to a doctor in AIMS through whatever friends and connections you have, get a second opinion from the doctor in AIMS, saying, listen, is this sport? Should I really need this surgery or not? And then perhaps go back to the private. That is the confidence we have in a good, strong public sector. And of course, the underinvestment in public health. By the way, it's also primary health care, which is the real reason. I don't know what we're talking about. Srinath Reddy, who's an eminent public health expert, and I asked him, Srinath, why don't you tell us in simple words, what is this whole thing about primary health care? Because, medical doctors say primary, secondary, tertiary. So Srinath has explained to me, and I believe by that, primary health care is all that you have to do to ensure a person does not reach the hospital. Okay, so I think that is the way. We can't be focusing on hospitals, building one more hospital in AIMS hospitals. We need those facilities, but you have to do the preventive action. How do we stop you? That includes promotive, a lot of what about talking about diets, what should we feed the children? When we hear 35% of children are stunted, a major reason behind that is not income, it is not food availability, but just lack of knowledge on a proper diet for a baby. So I think so because of the low spending, we have high out-of-pocket expenditures and so on. That story everybody knows. But on this private out-of-pocket expenditures, I want to say something which very few recognize. 75% of private out-of-pocket expenditure is on outpatient care, not inpatient hospitalization. So whatever hospital medical insurance schemes that you had, which the government is not addressing the bulk of the problem, is 75% of out-of-pocket expenditures is on outpatient care. And that is because access to primary health care is so poor in this country. Well, Ratin, I think you mentioned twice that you're going to die very soon. You're going to die very soon. Before 2047, we'll see. I think Modi, my prime minister, is expecting to live to 2047. No, but let me tell you that. No, I'll tell you why health is so important. Because there are two predictions that people are making. The first is advances over the next 20 years, 25 years in medical technologies will find cures for everything. These terms, biotechnology, stem cell therapy, immunotherapy, gene therapy, nanotechnology, robotics. So you'll get everything in this. It'll be at a very high price, which only we can afford, provided now that you're reaching 60, you better get your insurance to 5 crores or something, otherwise you won't get it. No, but what is the consequence of this? That life expectancy will go up to 110, 120. They're not going to let you die. So you better take new notes carefully. So what is the grand plan for healthcare? I mean, life expectancy is going to go up. And all these young people I see in the room now, students and PhD students and young faculty, you're all living to be 110, 120. How are you going to fend for yourself? So I think that I'm not here to scare anyone. It's not about 5 years. But therefore, what we really need is we cannot rely on this medical insurance. We have a national health policy that just doesn't care for us. They're willing to pay for the premiums of the poor. But don't forget, the number of poor is coming down. It'll be a shame if in 2047 we say 60% of the population is poor. No. So government's responsibility is coming down. So we cannot rely on a medical insurance system, which is what the United States does and tried to do, and we're a disaster. So we really need a universal health coverage plan. And I think we can talk about it later on what are the problems with medical insurance, etc. But we need to prioritize primary health care. We need to strengthen and expand the public sector in health. We have to step up public spending, which has been stagnant at 1.2, 1.3% of GDP for decades now. We need to use general taxation to fund the universal healthcare system, and we have to stop this reliance on commercial insurance. Do I have 2-3 minutes more?
1 minute.
1 minute more, okay. All right. The second main problem is India is free from providing free and compulsory school education. And I think if there is one big scam in this country, it is the scam. It is not the 2G scam. It is not the electoral vote scam. It is not the whatever Colgate scam. It is what is happening, what this country is doing to children's lives in schools. If today you find, regardless of the private school or the public school, the ASER surveys on rural schooling says that only 64% in private schools, 65% of kids in class 5 can read a class 2 textbook. And it's 45% for government schools. You would expect the government-private differential because any child who can afford schooling today, parents will send their kids to private school. Why is this happening? Once again, the role of the private sector in school education. Today, 50 to 60% of all children are going to private schools, unregulated private schools of dubious quality, exactly like Who are the kids left in government? And by the way, 75% are 100 rupees, 200 rupees, 300 rupees school fees are being charged. Who are the kids left in the government schools today? The children of parents who can't afford even 100 rupees, 200 rupees in rural areas. When we were pushing for the right to education bill, why did it come out only in 2010? After the constitution, there is no money, there is no money, there is no money. Even in 2010, the government was saying we don't have money to make education a fundamental. At that time, we used to say, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. And I think that's the price we're paying for. So give me 1 minute to end with a very nice story. Very eminent political scientist called Myron Wiener. We've all met him in our days. And he passed away, I think, in 1998. But he used to come to India regularly. And he used to look at child labor. And he used to say that main reason why there's so much child labor is you have not made schooling compulsory. So he did a fantastic thought exercise. He said, the one thing Myron will say is I really love the Indian hospitality of the middle class. You're all so kind and generous. You pick me up from the airport, your car and driver take me to the hotel, I have a wash, you invite me home, serve me a fantastic meal which has been done by a cook. Then I find you have got 2 little kids, there's a nanny looking after them, then you have a driver, then you have somebody washing your clothes and ironing your clothes. How do you achieve this lifestyle, which is the envy of every person in North America and Europe? Right? Stephen is looking at me and saying, yeah, Shiv, why do you think at this age I came away to Delhi? Sonipat? They can't afford all this in the US. So he says, how do you achieve this? How do you achieve this? He says, this is his story. We are in 1950. Nehru is presiding over the first cabinet. Nehru says, what kind of an India do you want after 50 years after independence? He said, we need an India where even the middle class can afford a cook, can afford a driver, can afford a gardener, can afford nannies, can afford a dhobi. We should become the envy of every country in North America and Europe. Who cares whether your per capita income is $80,000 and $2,400 per capita? Look at our standard of living and look at your standard of living. So Myron will say, what is the one decision that we have to take as a cabinet in 1950? Deny half the population access to good quality school education. And if you do that, you can sustain this lifestyle of the middle class, not only 50 years after independence, but when we are making a record of Viksit Bharat in 2047, I'll tell you, we will still continue to have the same type of standard. So my plea is, let's get serious. The priority has to be improving health. It has to be improving the school quality of school education, certainly improving women's participation. And thank you.
Well, thank you very much. So I have to turn to Prabhakar. Thank you for coming over. We thought you'd be online initially, so very grateful you're here. But now you're in a very key position, and you've been, you're getting all this policy advice in various forms in this panel. And there you are in Niti Aayog. So your take is the last word in a way.
Thank you so much for having me. Okay, let me speak as a student of economics, not as a Niti Aayog senior advisor. Then I think I would be better off. Okay. Yeah. No, I can always do the other part. Let me start with a positive note. My co-panelists, they have made excellent points. Some of the points are really relevant, and I can only say that we are all working on it. But I would not like to really take the horror story it's kind of a B-grade horror story by Dr. Ray. No, it is not. When you have kind of huge young population and they're highly aspirational, you can always talk the horror stories which sound very exciting. It's almost romanticizing the issues. It is not. Okay. I'll come back to these issues. I'm not telling that, okay, we have achieved everything. There are no issues. Every country goes through this transition, right? You go to any second standard student and ask what you want. घर चाहिए, बिजली चाहिए, पानी चाहिए, किसको पता नहीं. You don't have to be a politician or economist to know this. It's very simple. But why we have not done that in 75 years? There are issues. Simply, we don't have the resources. It's a hugely populous country. Anyway, coming back to the positive side of the story. Dr. Roy compared last 5 years. So, you had 2 years of severe crisis, which is twin crisis, health crisis, economic crisis. And we have bounced back like never before compared to all other countries. 9.1, 7.1, 8.2. One of the actually best, revival of an economy compared to everything else. If you look at the last 10 years, don't judge me because I'm from government, so I'm talking about the 10 years. But why I'm talking about the 10 years? Because 10 years, the world has gone through a lot of issues, whether it's anti-globalization moves, geoeconomics, geopolitics, conflicts, pandemic, everything. During this phase, India has achieved 6.7% CAGR. That is exactly double of the world economy, right? Look at all the indicators today. Where we are 10 years back, you had twin deficit, you had investment not doing well, you had the NPS, the highest ever, like 10%. Let me go through one by and tell you. External sector today, where do you stand? If it's very stable, look at the forex, look at the import cover, look at the debt servicing as percentage of forex or GDP, less than 5%. You are more stable than ever before. Okay, let me talk about the fiscal deficit. It should give the credit where it is due. This is the only government which has made the budgeting process transparent. All the off-budget items are part of the budgeting. And it has never really got into what we call the extreme populism for vote banks. The primary deficit, which is the very crucial indicator, it was 1.1% in 2014. It brought down to 0.4% in 2019. Before then pandemic and we lost it, but we are getting back. This year it is 5.1%, the fiscal deficit. Next year it's 4.5. It's absolutely essential. You want the participation. Participation, how do you create the capabilities? If you don't have the growth, and for the growth, you need all these, what you call stakeholders to participate. For that, you need to have a stable macro fundamentals. That is where we are. Look at the financial sector. The NPA today, it's less than 4%. In fact, 3.2%. It is going to reach 2.5%. The twin balance sheets which made corporate sector, they were running, there were a lot of rescheduling, re-rolling of the loans between 2008 to 2014, but then there was an asset quality review. Banks were told to clean up the balance sheets. That is where, neither the private sector or corporate sector, they had the willingness or ability to operationalize. And banks were also kind of not willing to do the project financing. The credit, it started falling, but then gradually there is a revival. And today, the credit growth is 16%. Okay, your NPA 3.2%. The public sector banks, they have got 3 lakh crore profit. The NBFC, the assets to, risk-weighted assets, the capital to risk-weighted assets, for a bank it is 16%, where the regulatory norm is 9%. For NBFC, it is 27% when the regulatory is 15%. So let's not, I can go on talking about it. Every sector. Yes, there are issues. I completely agree. We are in transition. Nothing is over. We need to take care of the issues, whether it's gender issues, whether it's health and education. I'll come back to that. No, before that, because I have few things to answer. I think we are spreading too much of negativity without substance. I can talk on poverty, I can talk on inequality. And somewhere actually you read this, and sometimes it sounds nuisance to me. I'm just telling as a student of economics. People talk about the crony capitalism, 80 companies having this, 20 companies are growing. Get the basic, fundamental right, basic economics right. Last 40 years, the growth has been a capital phenomena. It's innovation-led growth. Those who own the capital, they get the profit. Who owns the capital? The capitalist. We are living in a market economy. The inequality has gone up in every country. Inequality has gone up in every country. So it has gone up in India, but there are, kind of steps we have taken. I'll come to that. But let me talk about, because it is about the next 5 years. Where are we today? We are close to 4 trillion. And if you just have 7% growth rate, you will reach something like close to 5 trillion by 27, financial year 27. And close to 7 trillion by 2030, next 6 years. So we are very much on the way. Yes, I completely agree on one fact. This fifth largest, the third largest, it's not a sum. We are highlighting a bit. It's because the newspapers, I don't think they are governed by government or anything. But it's the per capita income, which is absolutely important. Even till today, we have STI, you have so many indicators. So we look at the per capita income as a kind of standard measure of what you call acceptable measure of standard of living. There we are close to 2,500 now. And the way we are going, and we will be reaching close to 18,000 by 2047. That is the Dixit Bharat document, which I'm part of it. Okay. And I can always defend every turn that we will reach there. The per capita income is fine, that's low. We need to increase that. But that is something, the ABCD of economics. Everybody knows it. What are we really highlighting? Okay, that's not great story there. The great story is this. You see, we are in a position where no other country is. India is really the brightest spot, and we are really in a sweet, what you call, period. The kind of favorable demographics we have, no other country has it. 900 millions of working age population. The average is close to 30 average age. It's 29 exactly. And it takes something like 30 years to add another 10 years to the average age. So we'll be reaching 39 close to 47. So this is the time for us. And once you lose it, you'll never get it. And that is where I agree that we need to make use of these favorable demographics. And there comes the importance of, Professor Shiv Kumar, I'm sorry if I'm getting your name wrong. There comes the importance of health, education, skilling. But there are issues. You just mentioned, the regional disparities or disparities across the states when it comes to this, health and education indicators. But always remember, it is a federal country. The health and education substantially are state subjects. So why certain states are doing well? In fact, regional disparities is one of the major issues we have to deal with. Today, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Maharashtra, they export 50% of our total exports, only 3 states. In the 5 states, they get 80% of the capital that is flowing in. So, the per capita income, if you take the national average, some of the hugely populated states and bigger states, they're falling behind. So, unless until states grow, India cannot grow. But when it comes to really the fundamental issues, that is health and education, it's state subjects, right? I'm not telling that center doesn't have the responsibility. We need to improve not only the allocation. There are a lot of initiatives have been taken, but we need to do much more. I'm not denying that there is no role for us. Now, there are a lot of positive stories, but let me not go through it. I would like to answer, if there are questions. There was a point, I think, which was highlighted. Yeah, to some extent, I agree that if we don't take steps, then there is a possibility that, we'll face what is called middle income trap. Okay, let me make you understand what is middle income trap. Middle income trap is very simple. When you are not part of the very innovation-led developed country or, very high value-added product chain, and you are also not able to or not in a position to compete with the labor intensive, so you get stuck in between. Now, how we have done or what is that we can do? The first thing is we are yet to reach that stage, what is called middle income. Look at Argentina, look at Brazil, even in Asian countries, I see Malaysia is getting into the middle income trap. Okay, it is getting stagnated. We are yet to reach there. There is a lot of basic things to be taken care of. But if we really focus on issues of health, education, skilling, and there are a few couple of structural issues I would be highlighting, then I don't think we'll have to face that. The Brazil, the Argentina, the kind of policies they had, why the productivity didn't go up actually to be part of the advanced countries or increase their income. I think India is different. We certainly can avoid it. Of course, we need to take policy steps. I agree on that. Then, the second point, why it gives, actually, I didn't want to really reply to the points, but spreading which is not right, that has to be stopped. Multiplier impact. Whether, if I remember, you just made a point like, okay, spend an X, I don't want to name, or spend on infrastructure, they don't matter. Look, we are all like, let's not forget the basic fundamentals of economics. It's very simple. I've done myself the estimations. The infrastructure, the multiplier impact is 3. Okay, one thing this government has done, in fact, with all this, what you call, lot of issues, lot of uncertainties that we have gone through during 10 years, if we have achieved the kind of growth rate or the kind of improvement across the sectors, it's because of very systematic policy. Whether it is financial inclusion, whether it is financial, what you call, there's a lot of steps that have been taken. Look at this, when it comes to multiplier impact, the CapEx. It was 2.5 lakh crore in 2014. It has increased to 9.5. As a percentage, the capital expenditure of government has increased from less than 2% to 3.5%, which has the maximum multiplier impact. And let me tell you how it affects. It affects a lot, including the employment you were concerned about. Because it deals with very important sectors, whether it's cement, iron, what you call power, it's labor intensive. So it's a huge multiplier impact. So that's now. So the multiplier is very, all these supply side measures, actually they are working. If you are still getting like 8% growth after pandemic and revival, it's because of supply side measures. Now there is thing that why are we talking about moving away people from agriculture to manufacturing? Okay, again, let's go back to the basics of economics. All the growth theories, they talk one thing, that big economies must move, that linear stage growth theories from primary to secondary to tertiary. That is how you're supposed to move. Lewis model, Kuznets model, Rostow model, all this. But what has happened in Indian cases before 90s, it was predominantly agricultural economy. We opened up, we had skilled capital, so services-led growth. So we kind of jumped from agriculture to services without significant or substantial improvement in manufacturing, which would have provided the jobs to the people, those who are in agriculture with very negligible or nil productivity, like 45% of the labor force, they are in agriculture. You don't need that much of labor force. Maybe 25% of that we need to, because these are the people, those who cannot take benefits or be part of the services-led growth. They can only work in manufacturing, and that to labor-intensive manufacturing. So there is a need why we should move away the labor and increase their productivity, by providing opportunities. So I completely more or less agree on many points. We need to create opportunities. We need to improve capabilities for these people to take or capitalize the opportunities. Even if we create also, there are people, those who are not. There are some industries in India, those who don't get people. But there are people, those who are lined up in lakhs for a simple job. Right? We need to change this. The world is changing. It's innovation-led innovation-led growth. We need to improve our R&D ecosystem. Look, the GCC centers, they are the new growth engines. That we need to create or enable our labor force to effectively participate and be a source of labor supply to the rest of the world, because world is aging. It's only India which has the manpower, but we need to make them care. You see, I completely agree on this. Health, education, but it's not only the center and states, they need to really do much more. We need to focus on labor intensive manufacturing. We need to focus on innovation. Without that, we cannot be part of it. And the basic fundamental, I think, let everybody get it. And again, this is a basic, intermediate school. Unless until you sustain growth, whether we like it or don't like it, we cannot have the developmental goals. We need resources, and for that, the growth needs to continue. And the rest of the things, let me tell you without giving details, because I'm part of the government now. Government has been actively working on on most of these issues. Let me tell you one more thing. I think there was a point about
in less than a minute.
Yeah, primary education. But government is focusing now pre-primary education, because the most important developments actually that takes place, it's like 2 to 5 years just before joining the school. Even government is looking at it very seriously, because that is the period the maximum development takes place in a kid. So there are many issues. Now let me stop here, but I would be very happy to answer any question. You can be very critical, but I'll have a critical answer as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it's commonly said that you can look at a glass and say it's half full, or you can say it's half empty. Or if you're an Advaitin, you can say there's no glass. It's all Maya and illusion. So we've got these viewpoints very well substantiated, each of them. So I'd like some interaction with the audience, and our panelists can take some questions. You can address it to anyone specific or to the panel in general. So let's start off. Over there, can you pass the mic? It stay somewhere middle. So yeah.
Thank you so much to the panelists for the insightful discussion. So I have a particular question towards Professor Swaminathan, and I would like to thank her for bringing gender and caste discrimination to the center of the discussion. So I would like to digress a little towards structure and agency debate, where we talk about Uva Chakravarti's critique of religious scriptures and how the moral codes discipline women's sexuality, or for that matter, Shari Ortner's virginity and the state, and its linkage with women's agency, let's say Saints concept of agency, and how it has a direct bearing on women labor force participation. So based on my observations in through the fieldwork that I conducted in rural Shravasti, UP, India, so women are the source of moral panic among the male members of the households and the male member of the community that where I interviewed, and the increase in mobility and visibility of women in public places is equated with loss of family honor and disobedience. So the aspirations, likewise, the aspirations among the women when they try to pursue even a semi-skilled work or look for economic opportunity is considered illicit. So we see the direct linkage between the ideological linkage between the women's chastity and virginity with the control of sexuality that draws legitimacy from religious scripture. So why this specific point is not actively discussed when we talk about women and work?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Madhura, can you note it down? Because I think in the end, all the panelists can pick up whatever they want to address. So any other, Swagato?
Thank you very much. My question is for Professor Roy. If I'm not mistaken, you said that there are those 5 things that needs to be done and there's no business model for that. And I'm wondering whether there's also any political model for that, for mobilizing people, because it simply doesn't work. Because if you see either it works on the cultural ideological front, or we have social justice, or you have a transactional relationship with this khatakhat business that we have seen. And therefore, whether, that trap that I'm going to use that word, whether you are also trapped into this autonomous individual as a liberal trap, which you are part of. It seems to be, got trapped into that, because as we know that in India, the individual liberties, though the constitutions, the fundamental rights are structured around that, that doesn't work. We move more towards the group politics and group rights, and that's where the locus of politics is. And therefore, is it possible to what you mentioned, to do that, to build up a new kind of politics?
Hello. My question is to Dr. Sahu, and thanks for your views on development. And my particular question is on, there is a report by Niti Aayog which says in 9 years, around 24.8 crore people are out of poverty line. So, but on the contrary, the number of beneficiaries under PDS or any other schemes based on beneficiary has increased. So it's quite contradictory when the number of people below poverty line, 24.8 is a massive number in 9 years. And on the other hand, the beneficiary list is increasing. It's not going, well. So your views on this point. Thank you.
Sridhar.
Dr. Sahu, I would like to know about the tax policies and how is it likely to be in the next 5 years? Because the center has seen a lot of tax increases thanks to GST and various other long-term capital gains tax, etc. How do you see this changing in the next 5 years? Now, I think the government could be far more confident about its tax sources and its ability to tax. And how does it see, should we moderate some of these channels to kind of reduce some angst in some of those stakeholders? The second is, how do you see the center-state relations to kind of evolve, right? The GST Council has had some issues. There is some anxiety in terms of how the devolution of finances can be much more cordial rather than it having to go to the Supreme Court and elsewhere, right? So how do you see these relationships change?
So thank you. Just three very quick points on Madhura's, bringing in caste and gender, which is very important. One was that very recent paper that I did, which looked at both caste and gender in terms of agricultural productivity. And it was very interesting that there were very little gender differences of male farmers, female farmers owning land. The real difference was caste. And it's scheduled caste versus, OBCs did better, upper caste did better. So that, I think, is extremely important, that even within the caste gender equation, upper caste women do well. But there are two other points which need to be talked about. No, the two small comments, and then you could respond to it. One is that social networks matter. So this is something that hasn't been studied. and maybe, it's something that since you're doing field work could be looked at, because we found that the difference between Kerala and Telangana, even in groups, was that if you had heterogeneous groups, like in Kerala, across caste, they were able to negotiate disadvantage where you had Dalits, whereas you had predominantly Dalit groups in the Telangana case, they were not able to negotiate well in land markets and other markets. And then finally, there's some positive news, very, very interesting work that's been done where some studies looked at scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, so they found that the worst that performers in terms of access to services were the scheduled tribe. And why did scheduled caste do relatively better was because they were organized and they had political voice. So I wanted your response to how that's playing out, because that's actually showing up in some of the studies.
Over there, last row.
Hello. So, sir, this is question for Sahu, sir.
Just introduce yourself a bit.
My name is Shruti Sabharwal. I'm a PhD scholar here, and I also work at NITEB. So, sir, Sahu, sir, my question is, so our economy is exhibiting growth, and the recent estimates by NSO, they state that the growth is 8.2% for the recent 23-24 year. And so also, as you said, that we are at the stage of benefiting from demographic dividend. But still, this question comes up in mind that then why are there so many subsidy programs, and all sorts of subsidy programs are being are there for people. And then, as Ratan sir said, that there's this Narega program which is there for people. So despite there being a lot of growth, we are still giving benefits, employment benefits to poor, subsidy programs. So I mean, what explains this? That, there's a lot of growth, and then again, we are giving these subsidies and all to poor people.
Right.
So where's the growth?
Naveen, I think then we'll go to the online participants after you, Naveen. Who's online?
Professor Roy, the first question I wanted to pitch to you, it's more a clarificatory question. I couldn't quite understand the link that you were making on why the equity markets are growing. So you said that return on capital is declining, return on education or skill is it has been stagnant, but then what is the fundamentals on which the equity markets are growing? So, I mean, is it just a bubble? So that's the first question. Dr. Sahu, the second question is for you. So we've seen tremendous improvements in infrastructure, and even when in my limited field work in remote regions of Madhya Pradesh, I could see phenomenal improvements in road infrastructure. That's all great, but where is the private investment? What is preventing private investments from coming in? That's the big missing link. Yeah, thank you.
Steve?
Very briefly, because I know you're getting toward the end, but I can't resist asking this question regarding the emergence for the next 5 years of India proposing a new model, its own model for growth for the world, an alternative to the other models that exist. And it's often contrasted with China or the United States. But I've heard a description of a model that seems to be based on enhancing manufacturing industry, banking, essentially capitalist growth, increasing GDP, rejecting the idea of human development, accepting the idea that the greatest value is growth determined in terms of GDP. And I'm wondering how that is different. How is that it's an original Indian model, where I had thought that one of the great accomplishments of India is to have a constitution, Article 21 of which has been interpreted by the Supreme Court as guaranteeing to everybody full access to education and to health, unlike the United States. But is India abandoning that model? Is India now proposing to reject the model that all people have these, that a jobless, ruthless, voiceless, futureless growth is not the Indian model? Or is that the Indian model, to be a jobless, ruthless, voiceless, and futureless growth? Thank you.
Okay, anyone online? No one? All right, no, you didn't mention rootless. That's a kind of growth where you sacrifice your cultural heritage. You build a dam and take away sacred lands of tribal people for whom it's all, so that's rootless. But I think there's a lot of rootedness, or at least an interest in roots, going back to our roots right now. So maybe we are saved from rootless growth. But now I'll,
Ruthless.
yeah, but he missed out rootless.
He said, you said, and he said maybe rootless. I said, but there's also ruthless.
Okay. Yeah, so let's start at that end for a change. You got a few questions, and we've got about altogether we'll another 10 minutes, and so yeah, two minutes each. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Now, there are some very interesting questions, so let me answer if you don't mind. It may take little more than that. The first thing is, yeah, it's a very valid question that Niti, they have brought down. Not, I see, they have estimated that multidimensional poverty, the people, below that, it has gone down from 29% to 11. Basically, 24.5 crore population, they have come above this multidimensional poverty level. If that is the case, why are we continuing this mega food program where 80 crore population are given the subsidized foods? It's a valid question. Look, it was a response after the pandemic where the revival was a bit skewed, and particularly the informal sector and the rural economy, people those who are staying away, they were very badly affected, even the poor people in the urban areas. So it was meant that maybe government will review it. Government has extended it for next 5 years with 11 lakh crores. So there may be a revision or, in fact, this PLFS data I was looking, if you look at the lower strata, the expenditure and consumption expenditure has gone down because they're getting a lot of food and they're not spending money anymore on the food. Right. So, it can go anywhere. I think that's a valid question. And coming to the tax policy, look, it is only going to get better. We maybe, will push for more rationalization. Maybe the rates would be kind of going down further because the GST has stabilized. Now it has captured, and every month to month, quarter to quarter, and year on year, it's going up. But there is a need to really extend the base for direct taxes. So there we need to work on it, but it doesn't mean that we are going to, like, our government is thinking of like increasing the tax rate. Rather, it would be much more rationalization, and the rates would be certainly going down. Coming to the point, this center-state relations, how do we see it going? Okay, it is, I hope you meant about the fiscal financial arrangement. Look, starting from 14 Finance Commission, they have increased the shareable pool to 42%. If you leave out Jammu and Kashmir, it was 41%. But what is happening actually, the way I see it, after this GST, there is very little space available for the states to mobilize more resources. But some of the states, though, where they have these options, they are not exploring it. Non-tax revenues, that's not exploring. Some of the states, the liquor policy, the excise duty on that, it's not increasing because they're all kind of part of the system. But the central government is doing much more than they thought. They thought that, okay, the Finance Commission has given more, like it's 42%. So they can come out of some of the policies, those were meant for regional development and all that. But it is not happening. Center still is continuing with some of the policies because it has its developmental priorities, sustainable development goals. In fact, the responsibilities are much more for the central government when it comes to the security, the border areas, the climate actions. What center thought, it's not happening. So I think more or less center-state relations, I think when it comes to finances, states needs to explore the non-tax revenues. And center, there is one of the issues always that, okay, this specific, what do you call the surcharges, the sales, which is meant for only for that particular thing that is not shareable with the states. Maybe I think, government can look at it to ensure that there is like something for the states as well. Now, this subsidies, I think the point, if I understand your question right, why are we giving lot of subsidies and then the growth story? I think, all my co-panelists, most of them, in some or other way, they're pointing out one thing. And that's like inequality, improving capabilities, opportunities, all this health, education, scaling a business. See, what has happened is there is a structural issue, as I mentioned. We have not created enough opportunities for the people, those who are there in the rural India. And where can we provide opportunities for them? They cannot work in the IT offices. They cannot work in this, OP Jindal universities, unless until somebody wants to sweep, right? Where can they work? We need to create decent jobs. Something like somebody, the 5 people in a family, they're working on 2 hectares of land. You take out 3 people because their marginal productivity is close to zero. You take them to a factory where they can get 15 to 20,000 rupees per month. That can be called as decent jobs. That has not happened. In manufacturing, the results are mixed. We have done well, we have given PLI, we have improved in electronics and pharmaceuticals and automobiles, but we have not done well when it comes to labor-intensive manufacturing, whether it is textile, it's leather, it's food processing, it's ancillary industries. They are the job creators for the people, those who are there in agriculture with very limited skills or with very limited education, right? Once we take care of that, and there are a lot of efforts going on, we have not succeeded, but then this is an opportunity for us. Why? Because China in a big way left the labor intensive space. That has been taken by Vietnam. The wages are going up. It's a small base. They don't have the endowment like we have. They don't offer the market like we have. So the labor intensive manufacturing, because of aging or increasing in cost of productions, they are all vacated in a big way. And that is where we need to capitalize, like what we have done for a kind of PLI to augment the domestic production so that we don't depend on China or, what you call import dependency, which could be used as a weapon. We should do, or we're thinking about like, having something very special on labor intensive manufacturing, which is bring down inequality and all that. Because, 45% of the people.
Dr. Sahab, you made that point in your presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And now that's point about the private investment, I completely agree with you. After global financial crisis, 37%, even today, it's close to 35% actually. In between, it was much lower. It has not really picked up, and it is why it is almost like 60% recovery. In last 2 years, things are very good when it comes to private investment. It's a bit long story. I don't know whether I'll have
we
time.
don't have the time,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Starting from fourth quarter of 2016, the growth started like, quarter to quarter, the growth started going down. One of the reasons, the lack of aggregate demand. Just let's go back to the again simple basics. C plus I plus G. Exports was not increasing, stagnant as 300%, 300 billions. The C, which was growing something like 10 to 11%. No, you remember 30 years back, it was 62% of GDP. It is 57 today. That major component from the demand side, it's going down. Right. So things were not fine. And because of that, you must have read in newspapers that, the capacity used is like 60 to 65%, 70%. So whatever you do as a government, nothing will happen if the demand is not coming up. Right. Okay. So that is one of the reasons. But the most important reason is the collapse of the real estate, because the major part of household expenditure, household investment is in construction. The valuation actually went down. Some companies broke down, and then twin balance sheets didn't allow the projects to go up. And that is where the 5% decrease in household sector investment in construction sector. That is where your NPA went up. The stall project with 6 to 7%. And this 6% down, 37 to 31. And then that has become what is called stall projects. The last
Dr.
point.
Sahu, have you done? I think we got to move on.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Indian model, just if you allow 10 seconds, Indian model is not, let's not compare with any other model. We are talking, it's a democracy. And all this talk, ruthless, voiceless, you may have your own issues. I don't see it happening. Okay. I don't know. It's a perception.
Right.
But the only thing I can tell, let us not compare with China or any other country. When they started this manufacturing, labor-intensive manufacturing, they started, for many years, the workers didn't have a toilet break. Once you get into the company, 4 hours you have to work, right? So that's not the model we follow here. We are creating a ecosystem so that we have our model. India is different. Let's not compare with any other country.
Thank you. Yeah, Shiv.
Okay, I'll just make two. No, there were no direct questions, but I want to flag two other issues. We talked about the demographic dividend, which is very important for us, but we also need to invest or have a plan for figuring out over the next 5 years how we will reap the gender dividend. I think we have talked about it. How do we leverage the full potential of women to contribute to social and economic transformation? We should not forget the silver.
We'll discuss that in another.
Yeah, silver dividend. Silver dividend, we're all on this thing about aging. By 2050, there'll be 350 million people, more than the population of children in India were about the age of 60. What are we going to do? And the democratic dividend. I think there's some conversation that is needed on how do you strengthen institutions of democracy? How do you strengthen voice and agency of Dalits, of women, of different communities, disadvantaged communities, and so on? And that has to come through public discussion. The last point I want to make is, we all know what needs to be done. I think everybody is very clear. We are all very clear. And earlier it used to be said it is a lack of political will. And I think it is more political wool. And I'll explain what I mean by political wool. There is no clarity on what is the role and responsibility of a welfare state and what is the role and responsibility of the private sector as India marches forward to 2047. Where does the accountability lie to the citizens and who is going to ensure outcomes? Bye.
Thank you. I'll make 2 points. I think Bina useful suggestions. And of course, there's a huge variation, depending on, the types, not just the caste heterogeneity, but which specific castes in a region and the history of it. But I think to take, Kopal, your point is very important. A few days ago, I was very pessimistic when I'm thinking, because what I've talked about, gender and caste discrimination, a lot of it is rooted in Hinduism. It is there in other religions in some way also. But so I think, yes, as an economist, I have focused on certain things, but we need interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary studies on these issues because, yes, the social, the cultural, the religious does play into economic decisions and vice versa. I want to just make a point because I think, Stephen, you raised a very good question, Did you think India was a different model? I didn't. So I think there's an illusion of India, particularly in Western media, based on economic growth. And another thing, based on the fact that if you take 5% of our population, that's hundreds of millions. So the hundreds of millions are going to Europe, are buying whatever, Mercedes, doing so many things. So what you see very visibly, and in the cities of India. So if you travel to the rural, you'll get a very different picture. But I think there is a different model, if I can speak here, and that is the Kerala model. It's not ideal. There are lots of problems, but there's universal education, there's public education. All my friends send their children to government schools. We go to the public healthcare. During COVID, that was the safest place to be because you felt you could be treated in the public healthcare without your bank balance being broken. But there were deaths, there were problems, there were as elsewhere. There is another problem. I talked about wage rates in Kerala and how they were higher in terms of the cost of recommended diet. So in a federal system, it's easier for private investment to go elsewhere where wages are lower. So I think there are concerns, but there's also a possibility of something different in India. And I hope you will visit Kerala.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to focus on two questions. I mean, for the rest of it, I mean, there's no point. I mean, you want to check out what the multiplier is, go and read a textbook, frankly. But for the others, I think you asked a question of clarification. Let me explain. I'm an industrialist. I'm selling 100 units. I make a profit of 20. And I make that profit of 20 by borrowing. So my costs are what? I spend 60 on labor and 20 are my costs of capital. I borrow capital, I pay interest on it, not my own capital, right? And I make a profit of 20 in that business, running 80. What if I started selling less than 100? I start selling 80. The first thing I need to do is I need to borrow less because I need less working capital and I need less labor. And I don't have to pay my labor more. My profit rates go up, right? That is exactly what has happened in India. These great, Mr. Sahu said, innovative companies called Adani and Ambani, and maybe there are some others, I don't know. They basically reduced output, kept wages stagnant, went debt-free, which is why our banks are so good now, because the banks are not able to lend. That's not the entire reason. The taxpayer has bailed out the system. We do it every 15 years. So for 7 years, bureaucrats in government can say, oh, look how clean our banking system is. NPAs are going up, they'll go up again. I'm not blaming this government for that. There is rent seeking in this country. The banking system is there. It exists for people to rob it. We have not cracked that problem. We can see that with SEBI and the kind of regulation we have today. And until you crack that, until you crack courts, until you crack the IBC, lots of lawyers here, you're not going to be able to crack the problem of people robbing essentially the taxpayer. So the banking system was solved at the expense of a bailout of 5% of GDP of the taxpayer. Now, the problem is people aren't borrowing from them. So the only engine that is working in this country is the profits engine. Then stock markets will go up. And if the government of India was a little more competent and they managed to do the disinvestments they had promised, they've fallen short by 10 lakh crores. Tab to aur bhi chandi hoti. You know, the safe thing, go and buy SBI, go and buy Indian Oil, go and buy LIC. We have been saved by the incompetency. They're not even able to privatize 10% of LIC for the last 2 years. You can't read on a file, that is the problem. No treats any of that. There are serious things to do, and government of India is not serious in many of these things, especially the finance and technocratic functions. I've seen it from the inside. So that's your answer there. Your question, I'm going to spend a minute on and try and link it with Steve. I completely agree with you. You know, the trouble is that when you talk to people in India, they seem to think that there are technocratic solutions, which is why the state is constantly defending itself. In all the comments I made, I was not even talking about the state. I was talking about India. The state is not India. And the state actually is the feeblest part of India. Just look at the traffic. They can build highways. They can't stop a motorbike from coming ulta. What kind of state are we talking about here? It's a very weak state. Now, because they are weak, they have to go on justifying themselves, defending themselves. We are doing great. India is great. Ignore all that. We have a much more serious problem in the state. The state is weak because our society is extremely fragmented, extremely fractured. Take the problem of education. I say the problem of education is this. Given the political economy of this country, what has happened is that we, the parents of our children, don't want education. We want credentials. India is the land of the competitive exam. Who gives that? Toss. About class 10, class 12, BA, MA, MPhil, whatever. These are just, you know, pieces of paper to take a complicated exam and become a babu or become a policeman, right? And if you are really good at taking those so-called pieces of paper, you get a real education. What do you do for that? What are rich people do? What are politicians are doing more and more? When I was a student, I went abroad as a postgraduate on a scholarship. Now, an IAS officer, I've done the research, a joint secretary to the government of India with 2 incomes and no family emergencies or volatile shocks, can afford to send their children abroad, and they are doing so. They are, I mean, apart from Ashoka and maybe Jindal, you know, these are bubbles, but they are basically withdrawing from the business of mass education together. So we have these societal problems, which is really my focus, which we need to work on. The biggest societal problem we have, which ties in with my other co-panelists in India, is it's very interesting about the Indian Constitution. If you look at the preamble, it says the state shall strive to secure liberty, right? Foster equality, Article 21, and promote fraternity. Ambedkar was very clear on this. The state makes no claim to being able to, you know, produce BTechs from the IIT who will come and bring fraternity to this country. That's a fundamentally societal project. And the trouble with India, I've always felt, and this is our binding constraint, and which is why going back to home market demand, going back to produce things where people live and what they consume, and all the comments on caste and gender, the other thing I've said separately is that we are going to have a social revolution in India. I'm not buying it unless there is a substantial eminence of feminism in it. There will have to be a feminist revolution for any social revolution to happen. So fraternity is what we have to look at. And then the state is a bit actor. In my same film language, they're extras. The state is a consequence of how we fraternize in society. And if we're able to create a more fraternal society, then I think we will avoid the middle income trap that economics brings. So far from being an economist, I'm saying it is the economy stupid, but the solution is not the economy stupid. That sort of thing, absolutely.
All right. So,
Agreed.
So let's give a good round of applause to our panels. I said they would be provoking, and they were, all of them, in various ways. So maybe we can grab a.
Dean, we have some scarves to give to the
Oh,
panel.
all right. So there's a Jindal University ritual that was initiated by Vice Chancellor Rajkumar, which is to give you a scarf, even yes, and then yeah, you have a few. This one is different because each time we add a school, we add a line to the scarf. So yes, so the first one is yours. Put your name in there. Oh, it's got my name in there. That means you can't give it away. Thank you.
Yes, high tea is served outside. We'll start our parallel sessions a little late by 12:45, and we'll start similarly. Let's see what happens with the other sessions. Uh, the lunch is served at 1:30, so you can actually start moving there as soon as you wrap up your sessions. Thank you. The lunch venue is T6 fourth floor. It's written on the brochure as well. So we have student coordinators escorting you.
लाइव
You'll
स्टार्ट
find
कर दो अभी हेलो
But I wanted to be part of yes, actually,